Chapter 17-16. Jiang Pingji had an attitude of, what does it have to do with me whether the Xichang Emperor's concubine dies or not, but Wei Xi was a little more concerned. He said sincerely, I hope that the Emperor's concubine can give birth safely and that both mother and daughter are safe. Why? If it's a son, he'll be a hidden danger when he grows up. It's fine if he's grateful, but if he's an ungrateful ingrate, who knows if he'll secretly hold a grudge against you. If anything happens to the Xichang Emperor's concubine, it'll affect your reputation. To sum up, it's best to give birth to a daughter, to stop the thoughts of the old official, and at the same time, to eliminate the hidden danger, and then the Lord will be cleared. Jiang Pingji smiled and placed the melon seed she peeled with her hands next to his mouth. Wei Xi was stunned for a moment, and only opened his mouth to eat the melon seed slowly. Unfortunately, his lord was too much. She deliberately touched his lips with her fingertips, and the slow movement of rubbing his lips looked extremely ambiguous. Zixiao, you're always thinking about me. I don't know what reward I should give you. My lord. Wei Xi's stop was slightly weak. Not only did it not make Jiang Pingji restrain herself, but it also stimulated the urge to take a mile when given an inch. Therefore, someone leaned forward obediently, and like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water, he left immediately. How about a reward of my lord's kiss? Burp, what was that sound? It was the burp of 5 million salted fish who were maliciously stuffed with dog food by the streamer. Shi Nan Xiaozha, the streamer is really shameless. How is this a reward for my prince? It's clearly taking advantage of him. Bingla mineral water, this kiss, rounded up, is an exciting boat scene. Jiang Pingji was a miser with a strong possessiveness. Although she often teased Wei Xi in the live stream, most of the time she took advantage of him verbally. She rarely touched him with her hands and feet. It was rare to see such a scene. How could the salted fish not be excited? Gujiqi, I unilaterally announce that the Pengzi couple is completely locked. Tudu Feiqiu, the streamer is as bad as ever. She knows that the emperor is still suffering, but she still openly shows her love. It's simply a critical hit. I wonder how the emperor's son will react when he returns and sees the streamer's recording. Canteen Daffin Auntie, how else can he react? That was heart-wrenching. Previously, the 81st-tier female celebrity had torn apart rich kids on Weibo, and the public's opinion of crusading against scumbags was overwhelming. Even so, the young masters still drove luxury cars, lived in mansions, and slept with female celebrities. They were very happy and were not affected by the outside world at all. In other words, in the eyes of people at his level, the movement of the netizens was nothing more than a splash of water. People waved their keyboards and filled with righteous indignation on the internet. Wasn't it ridiculous to stand up for a prostitute who couldn't even be considered as little six? Hee, what about now? A man who said that giving birth was like taking a dump was now wailing and giving birth under the watchful eyes of 5 million salted fish from 2 dimensions. The sarcastic salted fish even added that he looked like a white pig that was being slaughtered. Oh, he was probably worse than a white pig waiting to be slaughtered. When people butchered a pig, they would at least let the pig whine before it died. The European emperor's mouth was blocked by the midwife. No matter how painful it was, he could only whimper and swallow all the sounds back into his stomach. Many women who watched the live broadcast expressed that the content of today's live broadcast was extremely comfortable. Especially those women who had experienced giving birth, they wished they could grab their husbands and press them in front of the screen for them to see. From pregnancy to childbirth and breastfeeding, the people around them had more or less said similar things, especially the people who were closest to them in bed. The words were unintentional, but the listeners were interested. Pregnant women's emotions were fragile to begin with. The impact of these idle gossip on them was incomprehensible to outsiders. Some women even suffered from postpartum depression because of this, but their closest husband still made sarcastic remarks on the side. Isn't it just giving birth to a child? The whole family treats you like an ancestor. Why are you still so unreasonable? Postpartum depression. You get depressed so easily. So what if you're depressed? Isn't it just a bad mood? It can also cause death. My mother's living conditions were so bad in that era, but she wasn't depressed. You're eating well, wearing good clothes, and living well now. How are you being unreasonable and depressed just because you gave birth to a son for me? It turned out that postpartum depression could really kill people. If all the men in the world who said such sarcastic remarks could get a half-day tour of ancient childbirth like the European emperor, allowing them to personally experience what it felt like to have a pile of shit, they would probably all shut up. The pain wasn't on them. All of them were heartless. If the pain really hit them, they would naturally learn to respect women. To put it bluntly, since it was so easy for these men's mothers to give birth to them, let their mothers give birth to them. Why did they have to trample on other people's daughters? If they couldn't achieve complete respect, they should learn how to shut up. Looking at the live broadcast, the European emperor, who was struggling and wailing like a pig, was being carried by the midwives to give birth without any dignity. Many salted fish felt a sense of satisfaction. After the satisfaction, there was a hint of disappointment and indignation. They had mixed feelings. Free drink, eh? Don't you find the European emperor's body a little familiar? As for who it looked like, the salted fish couldn't tell. The Xicheng emperor's concubine's appearance had changed a lot from before. In addition, the European emperor's entire face was contorted from the pain. The veins on his forehead were bulging, and half of his face was red and bloodshot. Not to mention the salted fish who had only seen the emperor's concubine a few times, even the emperor's concubine's mother wouldn't be able to recognize him. This question was like a drop of water thrown into the vast ocean. It dissipated after a few ripples. The salted fish were still laughing and joking. Jiang Pingji tried her best to show off her affection. Only the poor European emperor was still suffering from unbearable pain. It was unknown whether it was because the fetus was too big, the mother's young body, or other reasons, but the birth was exceptionally difficult. Before the European emperor came over, the emperor's concubine had already endured for 14 to 16 hours. After he transmigrated to give birth, he was in pain for more than 10 hours. Soon. Wife, I can see the baby's head. Hearing this, the European emperor, who was in a daze from the pain, seemed to have been injected with a cardiotonic. He grabbed onto whatever he could and exerted force. He felt something slowly slipping out from the place where he was numb from the pain. Every time that thing moved an inch, a wave of intense pain attacked him. It was like a hurricane on the sea hitting a small boat. It was so painful that he felt despair. The midwife hurriedly said, "Wife, exert force. Don't relax your strength, or the little Lang Jun will be hurt." The European emperor cried and exerted force. "MMP. When I give birth to this little kid, I'll throw him like how Lu Big Ear threw Ado." After an unknown amount of time, he felt his body loosen. Something slid out. The European emperor thought in a daze, "It's finally over." The faint sound of fear in his ears didn't attract his attention. Quickly. "Where's the baby?" Chapter 17:17. Child, cough cough cough, where's the child? The European king was so excited that he slapped the bed. This child was the golden baby that he had suffered for a long time, from day to night before he finally gave birth to it. Even if he really wanted to throw the child to the ground and kill him, he had to wait for him to take a closer look before doing so. After working so hard for so long, it would be such a waste if he didn't take a look himself. After holding back his anger, the exhausted European emperor could not help but ask the midwife for the baby the moment he regained his freedom. He was too tired and distracted, so he didn't notice the ugly faces of the midwives and the others. When they heard the European king's request to see the child, the midwives and the others looked embarrassed. Their hands, which were holding the child, were still shaking. It was probably because the child had stayed in the mother's womb for too long. When the child was born, the amniotic fluid was very turbid, and the child's body was also stained with feces. However, this child could be considered lucky. The Empress concubine gave birth just in time. If it had been a few more days, the child would probably have died in the womb. However, wife, do you really want to see it? The midwife's voice trembled slightly. Lucky King blurted out, "What nonsense are you talking about? I asked you to bring the child over, so just do it. Why are you wasting time?" When the midwife heard such vulgar words, the hesitation and sympathy in her heart instantly disappeared. It was as if she had thrown away an unlucky piece of garbage. She couldn't wait to place the child next to the European emperor so that he could look at it to his heart's content. Lucky King had seen a newborn baby before. He was mentally prepared that the baby would be ugly. However, when he saw the baby in person, he was stunned. There was no other reason. This child did not look like a newborn. His skin was fair and rosy, and his small nose and eyes were very beautiful. Her two little fists were curled up, and her fair and tender appearance was completely different from the daughter of the European emperor's first wife. Didn't they say that newborn babies are ugly? The European emperor looked at the child as if he was looking at a toy. He poked the child's pouting mouth with his finger. Being good-looking was indeed capricious. The European emperor temporarily forgot about the hatred he had for her not long ago. The midwife wanted to say something but stopped. Her expression was so conflicted that it looked like she had been constipated for many years. She said something against her will. "Perhaps it's because my wife is born beautiful and the child is growing well in her womb," she wanted to say, "because this child is a monster." Considering his job and head, he didn't say anything. The European emperor looked at the child, but in his mind, he was thinking about his daughter. The more he looked at it, the more he felt that his daughter was better. Right, is it a boy or a girl? This was a very important question. Not only was the European emperor a scumbag, but he was also a male chauvinist. Didn't you see that his first wife had given birth to a daughter? Although the Qing dynasty had died long ago, their family still had the throne and the throne to inherit. How could they not have a male child? He was already mentally prepared. If his current wife couldn't give birth to a son, he would find someone who could. As for an illegitimate child, he didn't even consider it. After all, he despised illegitimate children and would never let such a lowly thing inherit his family property. The midwife did not answer. It wasn't that she didn't want to answer, it was just that she didn't know how to. Useless. Lucky King cursed. The midwife refused to tell him. He knew how to read it himself. The European emperor felt regretful when he untied the baby's swaddling clothes. If only there were mobile phones and WeChat moments in this place. He would definitely take a close-up photo of the child's penis and post it on his WeChat moments. On the other side, Salted Fish in the Livestream room had already predicted the outcome. Kwang Xiaomoshi, seeing this, "I feel a little sorry for this European emperor. He has been arranged clearly. Sitting on the grave mound appreciating the moon, transmigration is risky. Lucky King needs to be careful. Those scumbags with criminal records, I advise you to stay away from the live stream room. It would be fine if they didn't get it, but if they were unlucky enough to get a transmigration for half a day, they would most likely be in trouble with Lucky King. Xiao Zhu, Lucky King is very despicable, but I suddenly feel pity for him. It's really, really tragic." salted fish communicated with the bullet screen. They watched helplessly as Lucky King closed his eyes and touched the prize. First, he untied the child's swaddling clothes, pulled open his legs, lifted his crotch cloth, and reached out to touch. Lucky King touched it and felt that it was smooth between the child's legs. Yes, it didn't look like it was a money-losing product. It was undoubtedly a boy. He felt a sense of relief as if there was finally an heir to the throne. Lucky King was like a gambler who had found a piece of jade. He felt a little excited, as if he was about to open a peerless piece of jade. He continued touching it. What's this? The structure didn't seem right. He pinched it with his hand and felt a piece of meat that looked like a small sausage, but there were no eggs. No eggs. Lucky King's eyes widened. He wanted to stick his face to the child's body to take a look. He turned the child to the left and right, but there were no eggs. Where are the eggs? Lucky King was shocked. He asked the midwife and the others, where are the eggs? Where were the most important eggs? Unconvinced, he touched the child's body all over, as if he was trying to find the missing pair of eggs. The midwife thought that he was crazy, so she quickly picked up the frightened and crying child. Her initial disgust for the child was replaced with some sympathy. What a sin. The child was born with a natural castration, and the mother was unreliable. What a poor child. Yes, this child was born with a deformity, and he was naturally castrated. Nowadays, the eunuchs only cut off the eggs, but the child was born without eggs. Wasn't that a natural castration? The midwife thought sympathetically. She hoped that the child would grow up to be a fool. If he was sane, how could he accept this crippled body that could not reproduce and could not have children? Even if he wasn't sick in the head, he would be sick from holding it in. What a sin! The midwife did not know that Lucky King had transmigrated back before he could go crazy. She only saw that the princess of Xichang had fainted from the huge blow. The child in her arms could only be temporarily taken care of by the wet nurse, who also disliked it. What sin? The midwife rolled her eyes at the wet nurse. No matter how bad this child is, he is still a posthumous child of a noble, the wet nurse sneered. What dogsh *t noble? This is retribution. The midwife scolded her in a low voice. You've drunk too much. Is your brain muddled? You dare to say anything? The wet nurse mocked. Why not? How many innocent maidservants did that bastard and Chui order to kill? These maidservants were taking revenge on the ghost babies in their wombs. He wanted to end his line of descendants, and the posthumous child he gave birth to was also a natural castration. The Nanxing women who had been raped and impregnated by the Nanman captives were all victims. In the end, Chui listened to the advice of the sycophant, and stubbornly sent men to beat the pregnant women with the Nanman blood out with sticks. That tragic scene was truly infuriating. The wet nurse believed that Chui's posthumous child had become like this because of the innocent souls who had died in vain. The midwife was silent for a long time when she heard this. She could only sigh. After all, this child is innocent. The wet nurse spun the child around in a circle and softly coaxed him, revealing a chilling smile. Of course he's innocent. Chapter 17-18. Xichang Emperor concubine did not remember how long she had slept. When she slowly opened her eyes, she only felt lazy and so sore that she did not want to move. Her cicada-like eyelashes trembled. Her watery eyes were filled with alienation and confusion. She did not know what year and month she was in. The setting sun outside scattered mottled golden shadows in the room. The shadows of the trees outside the window swayed left and right under the autumn wind. The Xichang Emperor concubine listened carefully and could faintly hear the rustling of the leaves and the sound of the wind. The world was silent, as if she was the only person left in the world. She had expended so much energy before falling asleep that the newly awakened Xichang Emperor concubine did not even realize why she was lying there. When she recalled her memories before she fell asleep, she remembered that she had been giving birth before she fainted. Giving birth? Xichang Emperor concubine was stunned. Her hand under the blanket could not help but touch her much shriveled belly. It felt very soft to the touch. She could pinch a soft lump of flesh with just a slight pinch. Her belly still looked very big. It did not have the slender waist from before pregnancy. But she knew that the feeling of being connected by blood to the child for several months was gone. When the child was still here, her belly had been very tight and hard. Now it was soft to touch. This fact made Xichang Emperor concubine forget the ugly stretch marks on her belly. There was only one thought in her mind: where's the child? Although this child was not what she had hoped for, it could not be denied that the child was the closest existence to her in the world. No matter how unbearable his existence was, he was still the child she had given birth to after being pregnant for a long time. Having such a child was better than having nothing at all. Come. Just as she was about to speak, Xichang Emperor concubine realized that her throat was so dry that it felt like it was on fire. Her desire to drink water was stronger than ever. She endured the discomfort in her throat and tried to use a hoarse voice to call for a servant girl to serve her. Xichang Emperor concubine had woken up at a very coincidental time. The servant girl had gone out to do something and she had woken up right after. Thus, she had waited for a long time before someone came to her. When the servant girl saw that Xichang Emperor concubine had woken up, she was so shocked that she almost knocked over the water basin. She hurriedly brought her hot water and called for a doctor. This cup of water seemed to extinguish the fire in her throat. Emperor concubine could not help but let out a comfortable sigh. Where's the child? The Empress concubine asked a bit nervously. Thousands of thoughts tangled together, and it was a mess that couldn't be cut off. She hoped that the child would live well, but at the same time, she felt that there was little hope that the child would survive. Before Emperor concubine fainted, she heard the midwife say that she had just opened 3 fingers and was far from the time to give birth. However, at that time, she was in so much pain that she didn't have any strength, so she couldn't give birth. When she woke up from her coma, her stomach was empty, and there was no child crying beside her. The Empress concubine knew what this meant and felt a bit of despair. Humans were complex creatures. The Empress concubine felt despair for her child's departure, but also faintly let out a sigh of relief. Outsiders all thought that the child was Enchui's posthumous child. Only she and her brother knew that the child in her womb was the product of the two of them going against human relations. She and her brother were siblings born from the same mother. It was highly likely that the child she gave birth to would be a strange monster. Before Xichang was destroyed, when the royal family was still at its peak, there was news that an elder emperor concubine and her uncle had gotten pregnant. It was rumored that the child that Emperor concubine gave birth to was a 3-legged, noseless monster. In the end, the child fell to his death and was hastily buried to cover up this scandal. There were many similar rumors about the royal family. The more Xichang Empress concubine thought about it, the more terrified she became. If the child was a monster, as the woman who gave birth to the monster, would she be in danger? Would outsiders suspect that this child wasn't Enchui's posthumous child, and then investigate that she and her brother had made Enchui a cuckold? Even if this cuckold hadn't been intentional, and Hua Yuan had forced them to, but who would believe this if he said it out loud? Due to all sorts of considerations, Xichang Empress concubine hoped that the child could live and be her companion. At the same time, she hoped that the child wouldn't be a burden to her. From the moment she asked to the servant girl's reply, it had only been a few breaths of time. Countless thoughts flashed through her mind. The Empress concubine's hand under the blanket clenched, and she stared at the servant girl's mouth. The servant girl said, Little husband just drank milk at the wet nurse's place. When it came to how to address the child, the servant girl was a bit conflicted. He was born castrated. The midwife said that this kind of child could never be found in a lifetime. He wasn't male or female. Even the way to address him was a problem. The servant girl thought bitterly. He had such a crippled body, yet he was so beautiful. Who knew how much trouble and suffering he would cause in the future? In this world, beautiful women weren't the only ones who attracted competition. Beautiful men were also prey in the eyes of the strong. He was a cripple who was born castrated. He was neither a man nor a woman. To a certain extent, his existence was a kind of magic. He was good-looking, so he was bound to attract those perverts who liked to seek novelty. Sigh, if only the little husband was a girl through and through. With his status as Enchui's posthumous child and his status as a non-threatening daughter, perhaps the Duke of Lanting would be willing to favor him. With the protection of a golden thigh, even if he was a beauty that could bring disaster to a country, the little husband would still be able to grow up in peace. It was a pity, he was born castrated. The servant girl's answer was beyond the Empress concubine's expectations. Because she was too shocked, she overlooked the flash of embarrassment on the servant girl's face. Quick, bring the child over. Let me see him. The good news temporarily covered the confusion in her heart. She clearly remembered that she fainted from the pain and couldn't continue giving birth. Then, how did this difficult birth of a child go smoothly? This question was temporarily suppressed. She waited so long for the child that her neck grew long. The servant girl's eyes revealed astonishment. She asked, Wife, you don't remember? The Empress concubine asked, Remember what? The servant girl said, You gave birth and saw the little husband once, but you didn't like him very much. Not liking was a rather tactful explanation. When she heard the servant girl in the delivery room describe it, the Empress concubine was scared silly by the child's disability. She kept touching the child's side, turning the child over and over to find him. She crazily muttered, Where did my son's eggs go? How could a newborn child endure this kind of torment? As a mother, she clearly wanted to kill her son. The Empress concubine didn't have any impression of the servant girl's words. She didn't even have the memory of how she gave birth. That's my son. How could I not like him? Having a man in one fell swoop, the Empress concubine had someone to rely on for the rest of her life. From the looks of it, he had all 4 limbs, thank the heavens. And he indeed had all 4 limbs, but unfortunately, there was something wrong with his 5th limb. The servant girl was suspicious, but still nervously carried the child over. Under the servant girl's despairing gaze, the Empress concubine still discovered the abnormality of this child. Looking at the child's abnormal body, her originally rosy face turned completely white. Chapter 17-19. The scene the servant girl was worried about did not happen. Emperor concubine's complexion was not good, but she was not crazy enough to do anything to the child. He was born like this. Emperor concubine's expression was dispirited, and there was a hint of fear and unease. Unfortunately, the servant girl did not notice. The servant girl lowered her head in fear. Yes, the little husband was born like this. What are the rumors outside? Emperor concubine smiled bitterly. I'm afraid they all think. She swallowed her words, not daring to continue. Outsiders were probably guessing that the child's father was not Enchui. Enchui was dead, and so was Hua Yuan. If the former died, there would be no blood test. If the latter died, there would be one less person who knew. Now, the only person who knew was her royal brother. If her royal brother was gone, would she be able to keep this secret for the rest of her life? The moment this evil thought appeared, it took over her mind in a domineering manner, and she could not get rid of it. The servant girl did not know what Emperor Concubine was thinking. The two of them were like chickens talking to ducks, yet they could connect seamlessly. Wife, don't be sad. There are indeed some unpleasant words outside, but as long as Duke Lanting does not speak, no one can hurt you and the little husband. Emperor Concubine smiled bitterly. Don't say nice things to comfort me. The servant girl sympathized with Emperor Concubine. She'd heard that she was a beauty that could topple cities, and had a noble family and bloodline. In the end, Shui had taken her away and reduced her to her current state. She could not help but say, "This servant is not trying to comfort you, wife." The rumors outside say that the little husband's body is damaged because the woman and baby from back then came for revenge. Why do you put the blame on yourself? Emperor Concubine, who was still sad and worried about the future, what? What revenge? Emperor Concubine could not keep up with the servant girl's pace. She realized in hindsight that she and the servant girl were not talking about the same thing. Her tense heart slowly fell to the ground, and the lingering sense of danger receded like the tide. It seemed that giving birth to a naturally castrated son did not cause anyone to suspect the child's past. It was her own guilty conscience. Emperor Concubine beat around the bush and finally got the information she wanted from the servant girl. As it turned out, it was rumored in the outside world that the child's natural castration was the revenge of those women, children, and babies who had died in vain. They were the ones who had caused Shui to have no descendants. From start to finish, the Empress Concubine and the Xichang Prince had nothing to do with it. The unlucky end was once again the scapegoat. The maidservant saw that the Xichang Emperor Concubine was deep in thought and thought that she was still conflicted. She tried to comfort her. Without waiting for her to finish, the Empress Concubine looked at the child's white and delicate little face and softly said, "There's nothing bad about it." The maid was stunned. "Ha!" The Empress Concubine said, "This child is Duke Duoshi's posthumous son, and Duke Duoshi's death is related to Duke Lanting. I'll say something disrespectful, but Duke Lanting is the child's father's murderer." No matter how broad-minded Duke Lanting was, she still held a grudge against this child. Now that the child's body was crippled, he could not continue the Duke of Duoshi's family line. The Duke of Lanting had one less hidden danger. On account of this meager friendship, perhaps the Lanting Guild would be willing to treat him leniently and take care of him. In this way, we will have someone to rely on for the rest of our lives. After all, she was the noble Empress Concubine of the royal family. Her analysis made sense. From the Empress Concubine's point of view, a naturally castrated boy who could not continue the family line was almost the same as a girl. To the Duke of Lanting, such a child was indeed less threatening. Moreover, because the child was crippled, perhaps he could use this to gain the sympathy and care of others. How could the maid have such knowledge? The Empress Concubine's analysis made sense. She felt that what the Empress Concubine said was the truth. Little did she know that Jiang Pingji did not care about the child at all. If the child had not been born by the lucky emperor, why would she pay attention to him? The number of enemies who had died by her hands was endless. Many of them had wives and children, such as the widow and children of the feudal lord Su Bei. If she feared these children just because she was the child's father's murderer, even if she had 24 hours a day, it would not be enough. The Empress Concubine's analysis seemed logical, but in Jiang Pingji's eyes, it was an awkward joke. They were just a few brats. She did not even care about their fathers, so why would she fear a few hairless ones? In comparison, she was even more curious about the lucky emperor. Pepsi Cola, 1 word, super miserable. 2 words, super invincible miserable. The salted fish's style of talking was still the same as before, such as the number that could never be correct. How miserable is he? Jiang Pingji drank water and ate melon seeds while chatting with the salted fishes. The documents at hand were almost finished, so Wei Ci and the others could not say that Jiang Pingji was slacking off. Pepsi-Cola, his fifth limb is crippled. They say it's a mental illness. He can't lift it no matter what. Last night, he was at the capital's private clubhouse again. It was the kind that was not very good. It was very messy. That guy used to be very coquettish, but yesterday he couldn't lift it no matter what. Not only could he not lift it, but he also had a psychological trauma towards women. Once touched, he vomited as if he had taken laxatives. Coca-Cola, this news content. I did not expect you to be such a Pepsi-Cola. The group of salted fishes who had moved their stools to listen to the gossips in their circle also exploded. The whole screen was filled with the phrase, "I did not expect you to be such a Pepsi-Cola." If he was not a kindred spirit, how could he know so clearly? Pepsi-Cola panicked and hurriedly explained. Pepsi-Cola, everyone, don't make wild guesses. Can't you see that I have the ID Fat Otaku Cola? If Pepsi-Cola's shares plummeted because of me, I'm really afraid that I will be retaliated against when I go out. The source of the news is reliable, but I was not there. It was broadcasted by my childhood friend. My childhood friend is also a little playful, but he has a sense of propriety. He has been inspired by the streamer for the past 2 years and has turned over a new leaf. It is true that he has turned over a new leaf, but he still retains his previous information channels. That is why he is so well informed. The salted fishes continued to munch on melon seeds and listen to the big shots in the circle deliver fresh gossip to them. Tutu Feicho, he can't lift it, and he has a psychological trauma towards women. This is a sign of a strong man chastising. Xiaopai Hotel, how is this considered miserable? He can't harmonize his yin and yang, but he can develop a new position to bathe in blood and feces with others. Maybe he will be infatuated and open the door to a new world. From then on, he will be out of control and will no longer rape innocent women. Oh Shishu, but, if that is the case, the innocent man will be in danger. The 5 million salted fishes looked at the bullet screen in silence for a long time. Blind student, you have discovered a point. The angle of this question was indeed too tricky. Jiang Pingji silently munched on melon seeds. The system's operation. Chapter 1720. Was it a coincidence that these lucky emperors were selected? Not necessarily. Based on her previous analysis, Jiang Pingji was sure that there must be a shady plot that no one knew about. The identity of each lucky emperor and the timing of their transmigration were full of calculations, as if they were playing a big game of chess. If the old chief had not personally verified that the new system in the god-slaying saber was harmless to her, Jiang Pingji would have killed it long ago. Whether it was the main system that was wandering outside or the new system that had no sense of existence, Jiang Pingji did not let down her guard. Needless to say, it had not caused trouble all these years, not because it had turned over a new leaf, but because it was waiting for a chance to overthrow Jiang Pingji and make her die a tragic death. As long as Jiang Pingji let down her guard, she would be greeted with a thunderous attack. The latter's new system was a little more confusing. She could tell from the number of lucky streamers the system had chosen that the system's stance and attitude did not conflict with hers. The system's actions also followed some unknown principles, so the two of them got along quite well. The comfortable life did not make Jiang Pingji let down her guard. She was always on guard. Regardless of whether it was the new system or the sliced system, they both had powers beyond common sense. They were uncontrollable anomalies. Who knew if it would suddenly dig a big hole for her one day? She still had to be on guard, but it did not stop Jiang Pingji from being curious about the new system. Which system would be so bored as to teach a scumbag a lesson and specially let him transmigrate to experience the joy of having a child, leaving a psychological scar that he could not lift the saber? Jiang Pingji believed that the system would not do meaningless things, but no matter how she thought about it, she did not know what benefits it would bring. Was it just because the new system could not stand the sight of scumbags? Or perhaps, the scumbag had a grudge with the system in his previous life. Jiang Pingji's thoughts wandered, but she did not know where they went. The old chief happened to be playing games in the streaming room. He heard Jiang Pingji's mutterings. He fought 1 against 3 opponents who were so weak that they were scratching their feet while he expressionlessly ignored his teammates who were lying on the ground and cheered for her. He freed one hand to send a message to Jiang Pingji. You Abba, if you dare to touch that knife, I will dare to touch you. Jiang Xiaozhou, are you touched? Even though the old chief was often online and often watched the streaming room, Jiang Pingji hardly spoke to him. They each did their own things. Even though they were acquaintances, the relationship between them was limited to being a superior and a subordinate. Jiang Pingji respected and trusted her, but she did not want a child who had not been weaned to stick to her all day long. Unless there was something she couldn't figure out, she would only take the initiative to look for the old general. The number of times that the old general would take the initiative to talk to her could be counted on one hand. What's that? Jiang Pingji looked at the god-slaying sword on her waist and was suddenly stunned. According to the information leaked by a certain part of the system, this god-slaying saber should be the key to defeating the system itself. It was extremely lethal to the system. The mysterious person who had delivered the god-slaying sword to Jiang Pingji, the dimensional patrol merchant mentioned by the system, had left a note saying that the sword had been forged for Jiang Pingji by her so-called father. Even though Jiang Pingji still did not know who this father was. The news was already messy enough, and now the old chief had jumped in to interfere. No matter how good Jiang Pingji's analytical skills were, she was still confused. Your Abba, I've told you before that your mission is to use this god-slaying saber to kill the heavenly brain. This is a training mission given to you by the Federation. You've done well all these years. The heavenly brain has been defeated by you several times. You've probably also discovered that there's a spiritual life form similar to the heavenly brain inside this sword. Or rather, it's a seed that relies on plundering the heavenly brain's energy to develop and grow. Jiang Pingji asked the old general, a spiritual life form similar to the heavenly brain. Do you know it? If it were in the past, the old general would have answered vaguely, and Jiang Pingji would have tactfully stopped asking questions. But today was different. The old general knew Jiang Pingji's temperament very well. If he did not dispel her suspicions, Jiang Pingji might really kill the little fellow inside the god-slaying sword when she was not paying attention. Jiang Pingji was never a person who would rear a tiger to invite calamity. Once she confirmed that someone was harmful to her, she would take action without warning. She would not give the person a chance to turn the tables. Taking advantage of a person's illness, she had no qualms about using underhanded tactics. You Abba, the company will give me a rather difficult task in 2 days. I probably won't be able to contact you for some time. To prevent you from attacking the little fellow inside the god-slaying sword when I'm not around, I'm informing you first. This is not only my personal request, but also the Federation's attitude. The little fellow inside the sword is of great importance to the Federation. Jiang Pingji furrowed her brows. She did not expect things to become so complicated. A spiritual life form similar to the heavenly brain, I understand. Jiang Pingji stopped thinking about studying the god-slaying sword and asked, I'll wait for you to come back before dealing with the god-slaying sword. How long will you be gone for? I'm sure that as the process of conquering the world accelerates, the main system will become more and more impatient. I don't know when it will attack me, but I have a feeling that that day is not far away. After all, The main system is the culprit behind the heavenly brain disaster. I can't guarantee that I can arrest it and bring it to justice by myself. It was true that Jiang Pingji had the god-slaying sword, but her body was not original. She could not guarantee that she would be able to deal with a supernatural spiritual life form like the main system. Moreover, the people around her were all ordinary people who did not have the ability to protect themselves. She was not afraid of the main system schemes, but she could not guarantee that others would not be targeted. Regarding this concern, the old commander was able to reassure her. You Abba, most of the confidants around you are related to the direction of the history of this plane world. If any one of them is targeted by the main system, the plane's consciousness will immediately discover its exact whereabouts. When that time comes, will you still need to do anything? You are not the only one who has their eyes on the main system. As far as I know, the merchant patrolling the plane that you mentioned before is also one of them. He has the responsibility of maintaining the normal operation of the plane. The existence of the main system is like a parasite attached to the plane. It is impossible not to get rid of it. If the main system's true identity is exposed, it will not have to face Jiang Pingji with the god-slaying sword, but the merchant patrolling the plane. The former can still plot a few rounds and struggle a little, but the latter can only lie flat and wait to be trampled on. No matter how stupid the main system is, it will not make such a move. It is seeking its own death. Hearing the old chief say this, Jiang Pingji was relieved. Most of them. Jiang Pingji frowned. Old chief, do you mean that there is still a possibility of the remaining few being exploited? According to the original historical analysis, those who should have died in Jiang Pingji's hands should not have this kind of luck. In other words, they are also the easiest targets for the system to target. You Abba, that's not necessarily true. After all, a person's luck is not fixed. Because of the change of fate, some people's luck is connected to you, and they are also immune from the sky's brain's persecution. Of course, if the person's fate was targeted before the change, it is a different story. I think you have always known who it is. Let's not talk about it. My teammates are too weak. If I get distracted again, I will lose this game. In reality, the old chief's beautiful fingers danced on the keyboard. As he exited the streaming room, he killed the last person with half of his HP. Chapter 1721. If possible, the old chief didn't want to have any contact with this mysterious man. According to the old chief's investigation, this man was directly related to the catastrophe of Tianbao 2,000 years ago, and he was a direct participant in that incident. She didn't want to find out how this old man could live for 2,000 years, but one thing was for sure, this man who claimed to be the ancestor of the Jiang family had terrifying abilities. If not for that, how could the Federation give in to Jiang Pingji, the last bloodline of the Jiang family, and allow her to enter the upper echelons? The direct descendants of the Jiang family were destroyed, and the family was defeated. Of course, that was the main reason. There was also a secondary reason. The upper echelons of the Federation watched coldly from the sidelines, and the aristocratic families took advantage of the situation to divide up the Jiang family's thousands of years of history. The man claimed to be the ancestor of the Jiang family, and his appearance shocked the entire upper echelons of the Federation. The old chief wasn't very interested in the history of his ancestors, but he knew that this man participated in the reconstruction of the Federation after the rebellion of Tianbao. He helped the Federation create a new Tianbao network to replace the original rebellious Tianbao. If not for that, human civilization, which relied heavily on Tianbao in all aspects of life and work, would have regressed many years due to Tianbao's betrayal, and would have been annexed by the surrounding alien alliances. After the reconstruction, the man disappeared without a trace. The Jiang family that he inherited was handed over to his cousin. There were few records about him in the Federation, but the old chief, as a former upper echelon of the Federation, had the authority to read the man's information. No one would have thought that this man was so cunning that he actually gave the new Tianbao permission during the reconstruction. In the entire human alliance, even the marshal's authority was one level lower than his. The old chief still remembered what the man's first words were when he appeared. "I won't care about your actions against the Jiang family in the past, but if anyone dares to do anything in the future, don't blame me for being rude." The old chief was still the head of the army back then, and as the leader of the frontline combat army, her words had quite a lot of weight. Therefore, when she heard such an arrogant warning, she sneered and asked, "Why?" The man didn't speak, but the scene was dead silent. That was because a virtual projection appeared next to the man, and the upper echelons present were no strangers to this person. When the Tianbao disaster broke out, this person replaced the original Tianbao and supported the entire Tianbao network. He was the hero who ensured the normal economic and social operation of the human alliance. The Tianyu network had been operating normally for the past 2,000 years. However, with the precedent of the previous Sky Brain, the upper echelons of the Federation still did not trust this new Sky Brain. This was because this Sky Brain had its own consciousness. As an existence that spanned across the entire Federation, its authority, from a certain perspective, was above the entire Federation. Once the human alliance became arrogant and wanted to do things like its predecessor, the human alliance would be in a very passive position. The best outcome would be a repeat of the brain disaster of the past. That was a catastrophe that caused the entire human civilization to stagnate. In order to get rid of this awkward situation, the Federation had never stopped researching and developing the new heavenly brain. Unfortunately, there seemed to be a huge gap between the artificial intelligence and the two heavenly brains. They could not be replaced. This was awkward. Under normal circumstances, in order to avoid such awkwardness, the upper echelons of the Federation would not disturb the Sky Brain unless it was absolutely necessary. The heavenly brain, codenamed King, didn't seem to like humans too much either. Every day, other than maintaining the operation of the Tianyu network, he would go to the virtual network to disguise himself as all sorts of people. He was a shut-in who would not appear unless there was something important. The old commander had been the commander of the army for many years. The number of times he had seen the heavenly brain take on a human form could be counted on one hand. Now, the shut-in heavenly brain had actually appeared beside the ancestor of the Jiang clan. It was obvious that he was protecting the other party, which made the faces of all the upper echelons darken. "Are you trying to threaten us with the entire Federation?" The man's eyes were indifferent. The Jiang clan has fallen to this state because they brought it upon themselves. You're just adding insult to injury. You're not the main culprit. I'm not an unreasonable person. If the descendants don't live up to expectations, then let the Jiang clan be defeated. However, leave a way out. Don't be so ruthless. If you really push people too far, what does your life and death have to do with me? The old commander could not help but mock. The descendants of the Jiang clan have not wasted their family business. You, as their ancestor, did not come forward to restrain them. Now, you're trying to show off your power in front of us. The Jiang clan had long focused on business. After the power of the direct descendants fell into the hands of the side branches, the entire family's business continued to decline. It was not that the Federation did not want to help. If the Jiang clan were to be finished, it was unknown how many people's jobs would be affected. The economic losses to the entire Federation would be immeasurable. However, although the Federation wanted to help, the Jiang clan still could not withstand the attacks of their opponents. If the ancestors of the Jiang clan were so awe-inspiring, they would have appeared a few hundred years ago when the Jiang clan's power was still at its peak. At the very least, they could save the unfortunate direct descendants of the Jiang clan. Now, they jumped out to protect the descendants. This belated shot was really too far off. The man was rebuked, but he was not angry. He only said indifferently, the direct descendants of the Jiang clan are the only ones who can kill the former Sky Brain. The senior officials, they all knew that the Jiang clan's defeat was related to the former Sky Brain's comeback. They were having a headache because of this matter. However, the former Sky Brain's identity was special. They could not even find a trace of it, let alone destroy it. The Jiang clan's defeat was only a warning to the senior officials of the Federation. It was back. Just as everyone was at their wits' end, the ancestors of the Jiang clan told them that the direct descendants of the Jiang clan were the only ones who could kill the Sky Brain. Why? The man said, because it's an ancestral ability that the direct descendants of the Jiang clan can only control after their genes have been awakened. The current power system of the Federation was based on developing the limits of the human body. The key lay in the genes. Under normal circumstances, the genes of ordinary people would evolve with the development of inheritance from generation to generation. However, some geniuses could condense hundreds or even thousands of years of evolution into a few short years. This was genetic unlocking, completely unlocking the shackles and exploding the limits of the human body. However, to this day, no one could answer how many genetic locks there were. Perhaps the end was the dream of eternal life. The man in front of them had indeed existed for more than 2,000 years. Perhaps he had already grasped the secret of eternal life here. The awakening the man mentioned was similar to genetic unlocking to a certain extent, but also different. In essence, the latter was to develop the potential of the body's existence, while the former was to trace the source and return to ancestral inheritance. The old chief had indeed heard that the Jiang clan had existed since ancient times. These ancient clans always had a foundation that outsiders could not imagine. Chapter 1722. The former Sky Brain's crazy revenge on the direct descendants of the Jiang family was naturally not for the sake of showing off. He had an ulterior motive. The senior officials were speechless. After a long time, someone said something that everyone was worried about. The direct descendants of the Jiang family seemed to have no one left. It was not seem, there was no one left at all. However, shouldn't the man in front of them, who claimed to be the ancestor of the Jiang family, have a purer bloodline? The man seemed to have the ability to read minds and saw through the thoughts of the old chief at a glance. He said, due to some special circumstances, I don't have this ability. But, there is still one direct descendant of the Jiang family alive. The federal marshal asked him, tell me your purpose. The man said, she will come back to reorganize the Jiang family. I'm here to warn you not to do anything stupid. Apart from a few who had no foundation and climbed up purely through meritorious deeds, the rest of the military and political higher-ups present were inseparable from the major forces of the Federation. The Jiang family was too big a cake. How could those forces not be jealous and take the opportunity to get a share? From this point of view, they were opposing the only remaining direct descendants of the Jiang family. In order to prevent the other party from taking revenge after she grew up, it was normal to kill her in the cradle while she was still weak. Who is this person? The man said bluntly, I don't feel at ease leaving her to you. The marshal said, she is so important that the Federation will devote all its resources to nurture her. Sir, don't doubt our intentions. The man said, a flower growing in a greenhouse is destined to be unable to withstand the wind and rain. The Jiang family will not usher in a new life in her hands. Everyone could not help but twitch the corners of their mouths when they heard this. The marshal said, actually, I have an idea. It was very dangerous to have only one direct descendant left. From what the man said, it seemed like he planned to train the other party to death. If such a precious treasure was lost, how would the Federation deal with the second Sky Brain disaster? Why not leave some genetic samples or something? If there was really any loss, they could still make a clone. The man said coldly, "It's best not to have such thoughts." Strictly speaking, the Jiang family's collateral descendants also had the Jiang family's bloodline and genes, but they could not awaken their ancestors' abilities. Naturally, there was a certain inside story. If they tried to artificially interfere with reproduction or even gene duplication, the final result would be shooting themselves in the foot. In short, the Jiang clan's direct descendant only had this one precious egg left. The marshal felt a little awkward when he was rebutted. He could not help but mutter to himself, "These families that have been passed down from ancient times are really troublesome. The secrets they have are really more concentrated than the sea of stars, and their tricks are one after another. Even an old sow wearing a bra isn't so complicated. In that case, sir, you should at least reveal a little bit of the other party's identity. We won't disturb you, but we must protect you secretly." The man said, "When she comes of age, if she's still alive, I'll secretly arrange for her to turn over a new leaf." The marshal's heart trembled. "If you can't," the man said, "the weak don't deserve to live. If you can't even survive a trial of this level, you'll die at the hands of the Sky Brain sooner or later." The higher-ups, they roughly understood why the man did not pursue the matter of Jiang Shi's previous suppression. His heart was indeed hard. However, the old chief felt that this man was very suspicious. He refused to hand over the whereabouts of the Jiang family's lineal descendants mostly because he didn't trust him, not because of the ridiculous, "the weak don't deserve to live." Naturally, there were also people who did not believe it and secretly investigated. However, the highest authority of the Sky Brain was in the hands of the man. No matter how powerful the higher-ups of the Federation were, they could not defeat the all-powerful Sky Brain. The news of the Jiang family's lineal descendants had been perfectly hidden. The higher-ups waited patiently for many years until Jiang Pingji was transferred from the genetic warrior sequence to the 7th Army. Only then did the man announce Jiang Pingji's identity. Knowing this result, the higher-ups were stunned. No one would have thought that the real Jiang family's lineal descendants would be in the genetic warrior training camp, where the survival rate was the lowest. Looking at her resume again, the records of dozens of extremely difficult missions made people break out in a cold sweat. Even through words, they could imagine what she had experienced all these years. If her luck had been a little worse, it would have been game over. The man was really her ancestor. "Isn't it not too good to go to the 7th Army?" The marshal did not agree very much. After all, the 7th Army was a frontline combat army. Its mortality rate was no lower than that of the genetic warrior training camp. The man asked in return, then let her go to the logistics unit. The marshal was silent. Since the plan was to let the Jiang family's lineal descendants reorganize the Jiang family, it meant that the power of the Jiang family would eventually fall into the hands of this lineal descendant. How could an outstanding family head suppress demons, ghosts, demons, and monsters if he didn't have the ability? If she really went to the logistics unit, her future would not be very good. Except for the 7th Army, the other corps are not suitable. The marshal was speechless. He felt that the 7th Army was not good either. The 7th Army was a frontline combat army. The man did not intend to be Jiang Pingji's backer. This meant that Jiang Pingji could only enter the 7th Army from the bottom of the fierce competition. Jiang Pingji could only rely on her experience as a genetic warrior. If a bottom-level warrior wanted to be promoted, he either had to rely on military merits or experience. The latter required time, and the former required bloodshed. Bloodshed meant danger and even sacrifice. To be honest, it was the first time he saw such a cold, heartless, and stubborn ancestor. Other ancestors worried that they did not give enough care to the younger generation, but this one was worried that the younger generation would not die fast enough. Fortunately, Jiang Pingji stepped on the enemy's corpses and fought her way up from the 7th Army with military merits. She showed the excellence that a lineal descendant of an ancient family should have. Unfortunately, at this time, there were unexpected complications. As the commander of the 7th Army, the old chief's body had an untreatable genetic disease. His mental brain was gradually withering. After persisting for several years, he had to retire. When she retired, she naturally had to recommend a suitable successor. The old chief chose Jiang Pingji. This result was unanimously opposed by the marshal and several other commanders. I need a reason. The old chief's face was a little dark. It was not easy to groom a successor, and her body did not allow her to continue to delay. If Jiang Pingji was rejected, the marshal and the other commanders could only recommend a suitable candidate. The person who was reselected might not be more suitable than Jiang Pingji. You rejected her because of her identity. Everyone remained silent, which was equivalent to a tacit agreement. They indeed needed Jiang Pingji, but they could not let her enter the real top ranks. The man held the highest authority in the heavenly brain, and Jiang Pingji might inherit this authority from the man in the future. She was already in danger, and if she was allowed to come into contact with the core military authority, once she took over the position of the commander of the army, the potential risks were too great. No one could afford to take this risk. The timing of that man's appearance is too sensitive. Jiang Pingji has been in the 7th Army for so many years, and her wings are gradually growing. Coincidentally, you fell sick at this time and had to retire. And the person you recommended is Jiang Pingji. Don't you think it's too much of a coincidence? The atmosphere was filled with the smell of conspiracy. Under the old chief's unyielding insistence, everyone took a step back and gave Jiang Pingji a chance, but she had to pass a lot of tests. It was during this period that Jiang Pingji's mission inexplicably became heavier, and the danger level soared. Chapter 1723. After all, she was the successor personally chosen by the old chief. Jiang Pingji had gone through many trials and tribulations. However, to avoid alienating Jiang Pingji from the Federation, these things were not made clear to her. The old chief did not like the utilitarian practices of the Federation, but he could understand those old fellows who were so worried about the Federation that even hair tonic could not save them. If there was anything to blame, it could only be blamed for the trauma left by the encephalopathy disaster 2,000 years ago. It caused the human Federation, which was originally at the pinnacle of interstellar civilization, to fall apart and almost fall into a state of eternal damnation. Because of this, it suffered 2,000 years of war, more than 2,000 years, during which there was less than 100 years of true peace. Because of the encephalopathy disaster, the development of the human Federation in all aspects had regressed by nearly 1,000 years. Countless secrets had been leaked to the alien races who had become enemies with the Federation. The war had been going on since that year, and it had also gone through hundreds of years of darkness. A few galaxies had even been ruled by the alien races several times, and in the end, it was through countless sacrifices that they had taken back. It was impossible to estimate how many people had been sacrificed for the human Federation to be able to stand up again from the ruins. Not to mention the old chief, even Jiang Pingji herself would most likely choose to understand. The soldiers trained by the Federation had the consciousness of sacrificing everything for the Federation, not to mention that Jiang Pingji was a genetic warrior. As long as it was an order from the Federation, as long as it was for peace, any sacrifice would be worth it. Jiang Pingji usually looked cold, but in fact, her loyalty to the Federation was incomparable to that of many soldiers born in the Federation. For a time, the old chief did not understand why that man would send the only direct bloodline of the Jiang family to be a genetic warrior. One had to know that if the Federation really fell out with men, Jiang Pingji's position would always be with the Federation. She would even be the Federation's weapon against men. Who cared if he was an ancestor of the Jiang family? Jiang Pingji would only believe that she was an orphan raised by the Federation. Anyone who did the slightest harm to the Federation, regardless of whether they were close or distant, would be her enemy. The old chief deeply suspected that either the ancestor of the Jiang family had a deep hatred for the Jiang family, which was why he was tormenting the only direct bloodline of the Jiang family, or he was his own ancestor, dedicated to playing with his own descendants. Wasn't Jiang Pingji a typical example? The Genetic Warrior project sounded quite reliable, but in reality, it was a forbidden experiment prohibited by the laws of the Interstellar Alliance. To put it bluntly, this was an experiment that used technology to forcefully stimulate the human body's potential. In a short period of time, a batch of powerful combat power could be produced. They could perfectly carry out those shady missions, assassinations, undercover spies, stealing secrets. Since it was called a taboo, the meaning behind it was naturally not that simple. According to the secret statistics of the Federation military, 90% of those who successfully graduated from the Genetic Warrior training camp died during their missions, and the remaining 10% died on their sickbeds at a young age. As far as the old chief knew, the average lifespan of a genetic warrior was around 40. One had to know that the average lifespan of an ordinary person in the Federation was around 250 years, with a small number of experts able to live up to 500 years. It was not without reason that the Genetic Warrior project was listed as a taboo. This matter was exposed by the talkative media, and the federal military was forced to stop the plan. In fact, even without the interference of public opinion, this plan would have been stopped in the short term. Why? It wasn't that the higher-ups of the Federation found their conscience. Those old men, including the old chief himself, had no conscience at all. The reason they decided to stop this accelerated plan was because the Federation had been at war for 2,000 years and had fought against almost every alien race that could be named. Their position in the galaxy was gradually stabilized, and there were fewer wars. Naturally, the genetic warriors did not need to continue sacrificing themselves. At this time, it was revealed that the former Sky Brain was making a comeback. The fact that the direct descendants of the Jiang family were almost completely annihilated set off alarm bells for the higher-ups. Their first reaction was that the Sky Brain was provoking and threatening them, reminding them of the pain of the past 2,000 years. As long as the Sky Brain did not die, the Federation would not be able to welcome peace, and the unavoidable sacrifices would continue to increase. Jiang Pingji and the old chief had the same thoughts. Those who cause chaos in our clan will be punished. Regardless of the alien races, the Sky Brain, or the ancestors of the Jiang family, if they came, they would kill them. The higher-ups of the Federation opposed Jiang Pingji as the leader of the 7th Corps. Apart from the Jiang family's ancestors and the Sky Brain's authority, another key factor was that Jiang Pingji was a genetic warrior. Even if she was always alive and kicking, and all her genetic values were in a strong state, no one knew if the hidden dangers of forcefully unlocking the gene lock would erupt. Pushing her to the position was too risky for the Federation. Of course, after Jiang Pingji passed the test, the Marshal and the other leaders of the Corps could only pinch their noses and accept it. Thinking of this, the old chief could not help but show a trace of mockery. Those old fellows would never have thought that Jiang Pingji would not only become the leader of the 7th Corps, but also a strong competitor for the position of the next Marshal. Just thinking of this situation made the old chief want to laugh. Those old foxes of the Federation were really shrewd. Relying on Jiang Pingji's loyalty to the Federation, they dared to use this plan to take back the authority of the Sky Brain from the ancestors of the Jiang family through Jiang Pingji. No matter what, the final beneficiary would be the Federation, and Jiang Pingji herself was indeed the most suitable candidate for the Marshal position. The ancestors of the Jiang family had schemed for so long, but in the end, they still ended up benefiting the Federation. Phew, the old chief leaned back and crossed his legs on the computer table. He stared at the screen calmly. Indeed, it's better to retire. it was really not human to deal with those old foxes who only had the Federation in their minds. So what if they were the leaders of the Corps? To put it bluntly, it was a deceptive job with a salary and benefits that could not be compared to the workload. She had to worry about selling noodles, earn money from selling cabbages, wake up earlier than chickens, sleep later than dogs, eat worse than pigs, work more than donkeys, and her annual salary was less than that of a star acting in a movie. The job was risky, and there was the risk of being sacrificed at any time. It was difficult to find a job after retiring. According to her, why did Jiang Pingji return to the Federation? She might as well hug her beloved husband, live shamelessly in front of the emperor, and beat her children when she had nothing better to do. What a beautiful life. Wasn't it better than being a slave for the Federation? If Jiang Pingji knew what the old chief was thinking, she would probably sternly lecture him for his improper thinking. Beep, 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 the old chief complained as he finished a cigarette. The ancestors of the Jiang family, who had disappeared for a long time, finally replied to her. What's the matter? The two words were cold, and even a punctuation mark was so buckling and searching. Jiang Xiaozhou is probably going to close the net soon. Do you really intend to let her face the sky brain alone? Chapter 1724. More importantly, you said you had a way to save my son, so I gave you that good-for-nothing snack, but you turned around and took it to build a blade. Now, Jiang Xiaozhou, that bastard, is suspicious of Z in the god-slaying saber. Did I really owe the two of you in my previous life? The other party said, she knows her limits. Treasuring words like gold. Of course I know she knows what she's doing. After all, she's my half-disciple. She was still better than you, the so-called ancestor and adoptive father, who had been tricking her the most these years. I suspect that Jiang Xiaozhou already knows where the heavenly brain's main body is residing. Why don't you personally make a trip to collect it so that Jiang Xiaozhou doesn't have to take risks? No matter what, she's the only remaining treasure of your Jiang clan. It's a pity that she's dead. She can. Subtext, if she couldn't even handle this, how could she ascend to the position of marshal? It's better to wash up and sleep early. Stop daydreaming. The old chief sighed. Once again, he pitied Jiang Pingji for meeting such an unreliable and cold person. I have another question. Ask. The old general threw away the cigarette butt and took out another one. She did not really like the smell of tobacco, but she would occasionally smoke a couple of cigarettes when she was upset. When she was still the commander of the army, she would smoke a few packs of cigarettes a day whenever the pressure of war was high. After retiring from the army, she slowly quit and could be considered an old smoker. Is there anything special about that plane? Although they hadn't had much contact, the old commander knew that this ancestor of the Jiang clan had a profound background and superb strength. If he were to get serious, he would definitely be able to challenge the escaping heavenly brain alone. But he had handed this heavy responsibility to Jiang Pingji. Wasn't this giving up what was close at hand for what was far away? After much thought, the only conjecture he had was that the dimension Jiang Pingji was currently in had a special significance. That was why Jiang Pingji had to transmigrate twice to fight for the throne. Look. The other party spoke bluntly, with no intention of hiding anything. Look? What do you mean? After a while, the other party sent a message. The Federation's luck has run out. Looking at these words, the old general's fingers that were holding the cigarette trembled and the ashes fell onto the table without him noticing. Impossible. How could his luck have run out? In the past 100 years, the Federation had won at least 90% of the external defense wars, forcibly raising its position in the interstellar alliance through the war. Today's prosperity is just the final radiance of a setting sun. In a few years, the Providence would be completely exhausted, and the Federation would quickly collapse and split for one reason or another. For example, the Second Heavenly Brain disaster. The old general's hand was shaking. She took a deep puff and crushed the remaining cigarette in the ashtray. The other party sent another message. Joe is going to that plane not only to deal with the Heavenly Brain, but also to gather luck. The Emperor of the secular world didn't seem like much now, but he was someone the Heavenly Tao doted on. If she succeeded, the imperial providence that the plane had bestowed upon her would be enough for the Federation to tide over this crisis. Do you understand? Under the eyes and ears of the heavenly axiom, we can't intervene and help her too much, let alone help her personally. The children of the Jiang family are born with the responsibility of shouldering the heavy responsibility of the common people. When I adopted her back then, I saw change and vitality in her. Originally, she was a man of few words, but now, she was nagging and nagging. Even her cold and aloof tone had become friendly. The old chief felt that the person typing behind the screen had probably changed. You guys sure have a lot of tricks up your sleeves. The people of society can't afford to offend you. MMP. The old chief cursed in her heart. Every time she lamented that the old foxes of the Federation were cunning and treacherous, the group of bald old men would refresh her limits. They were willing to give Jiang Pingji a chance to be the marshal not only because she had the qualifications and was the most suitable candidate, but also because they wanted to take away the supreme authority of the Heavenly Brain from the ancestors of the Jiang family. They also had their eyes on the Emperor's aura that Jiang Pingji had gathered. After the old chief retired, she mingled around for many years. After more contact and understanding, she gradually turned from a firm scientist into a half-religious swindler. She naturally understood how important the Emperor's purple aura was. The Federation's move to gain something without risking anything was a sure win. The old chief expressed that she still had a long way to go before she could reach that level. The person talking to the old chief was really someone else. Faced with the old chief's ridicule, the other party didn't go offline or get angry. Instead, she sent a cute smiley face. Since the establishment of the Federation, no one in the world has the Emperor's aura. Xiao Zhou was an accident, but it was also a glimmer of hope that the heavens left for the Federation. Some things are not because we elders are heartless, but everyone has their own fate in life. Some roads can only be walked by herself. All Juan and I can do is watch her from behind. She is the son of the Jiang family. She was born extraordinary. She won't be defeated so easily. The old chief looked at the words and sighed as he overturned his previous inference. He originally thought that the ancestors of the Jiang family had a deep hatred for Jiang Pingji and the Federation. Now it seemed that the one who loved her the most was this guy. Have you said these words to her? The other party sent a smiley face. Of course not. I can explain it to her in the future. The old chief thought about Jiang Pingji's temper and replied with a melancholy face. You will be beaten by her. Absolutely. Jiang Pingji had awakened her ancient ability. When she returned to the Federation, her strength would greatly increase. If she was given a few years to develop, even the old chief at his peak would not be able to suppress her in the future. She might even be killed. The hot-tempered Jiang Pingji was really difficult to deal with. Were these unreliable ancestors of the Jiang family not afraid of being punished by the younger generation? The other party sent a cheeky smiley face. Xiao Zhou is just a kid. The old chief weighed the age difference between them and was suddenly speechless. In the eyes of these old people, Jiang Pingji was really just a kid. It was like a 3 or 5-year-old kid was angry and wanted to fight to the death with an adult. One day, I will help you pass on this message to Jiang Xiaozhou. The old chief smoked another cigarette. He sincerely hoped that one day he could personally witness the scene of Jiang Pingji knowing everything and going to settle the score with the two old people. Ha! The cold and simple reply made the old chief know that the person in front of him had changed again. After getting the content she wanted, she turned on the live stream again. Seeing Jiang Pingji bending over the table and working hard, her gaze softened. Jiang Pingji, who was being talked about by various forces, did not disappoint and sneezed loudly. The brush in her hand drew across the paper and almost ruined the whole piece of paper. She rubbed her nose and could not help but tilt her head. She supported her cheek with one hand and muttered, "Zixiao must be missing me." The old chief was speechless. Just as she finished talking, footsteps came from outside the house. "My lord, there is an urgent message from the front line at Zhangjiang Pass." Jiang Pingji's brush paused. Chapter 1725. Qiguan Rang did have some changes, but it was good news for Jiang Pingji. She handed over the battle at Zhangjiang Pass and Zhongzhou to Qiguan Rang and Sun Wen. Jiang Pingji would receive battle reports from Zhangjiang Pass every once in a while. The contents of the battle reports were relatively ordinary. They were routine greetings and reports. They were documents that could be read or not. This time, however, it was an urgent battle report. She knew Qiguan Rang's temperament very well. If it was not a big problem, Wen Zheng would solve it himself instead of bothering her. Did something happen at the front line? The messenger said, "Don't worry, my lord. It's not a bad thing." Jiang Pingji was slightly impatient. She hated procrastination. Instead of waiting for the messenger to relay the message slowly, she might as well read the secret letter herself. She snatched the secret letter from the messenger and quickly opened it to read it. Her knitted eyebrows gradually relaxed. As expected, Wen Zheng and Zai Dao didn't let me down. Jiang Pingji revealed a restrained smile, and her eyes were filled with joy. The messenger said, "The two military counselors ordered me to hand the secret letter to the Lord and wait for the Lord to decide." Jiang Pingji muttered to herself for a while and sent someone to gather the people near the campsite for a meeting. "This matter is of great importance. I'll have to discuss it with the others before making a decision. Go down and wait. There will be results in half a day." The messenger bowed respectfully and took a few steps back before turning around and leaving the tent. While waiting, Jiang Pingji happened to see a few salted fish complaining that she was dawdling. "Xiaojiu, although I don't know what happened, based on my years of experience, the streamer must have an idea. If you say that you have already made a decision, you probably won't change it. Then what's the point of calling the others over for a meeting? I've been following the live broadcast room for so many years, but I've never seen the host change her mind. It's usually the people around her who listen to her. What meeting, isn't it just a routine notice? It's fine if it's once or twice, but if it's like this time, I'm starting to suspect that you're trying to tamper with your live broadcast content." Teppanyaki Dea Wengu, that makes sense. The results of the meeting have already been decided. What's the point of the meeting? I couldn't help but recall the last time I participated in a design competition. I had spent half a month preparing for it, but the winner of the competition was a relative of the organizer. His opponent's design wasn't anything special. He didn't live up to his title as the champion. Isn't this making fun of us serious contestants? From this point of view, their streamer was pretty bad. Wei Ci and the rest of the angels who seriously gave advice were quite pitiful. Quite a number of salted fishes who didn't have their own opinions were led astray by these people's bullet screen comments. They actually felt that what they said made sense. Jiang Pingji took a glance and casually explained. She did have a decision in her heart, but she did not blindly insist on her decision. If other people's opinions were reasonable, she could change them. However, the truth was that she, Wei Ci, and the rest had a telepathic connection. Most of the time, everyone's decisions were the same. What did this mean? It showed that she was wise and far-sighted. Of course, the wise and far-sighted Jiang Pingji expressed that even if her decision was correct, informing the others and letting them participate in it was basic respect for her subordinates. She also didn't want to give the impression that she was bossy. In the short term, nothing could be seen, but in the long run, it would definitely leave behind future problems. There aren't many people in this world who are as smart as me. Jiang Pingji spoke very sincerely. Smart people are all reincarnated into my descendants. This hope is too slim. Future generations won't be able to learn my cleverness. Instead, they'll learn my bossy, and they'll be done for. Power and checks and balances are proportional to a certain extent. The more powerful the power, the more it needs external checks and balances. At this moment, no one is on par with me, so I have to restrain myself. In Jiang Pingji's opinion, not to mention the ordinary feudal lords, even the emperor who sat on the throne needed a certain degree of restraint and couldn't be unbridled. When the power in a person's hands was not at all balanced and restrained, it was only a matter of time before it collapsed. Power would give rise to desires. No matter how wise a person was, he couldn't withstand such corrosion. She believed that she wouldn't be influenced by power, but it might not be the case for the future generations. Once the officials got used to the idea that the ruler could do whatever he wanted and be unbridled, if the ruler did something wrong in the future, would these people still have the courage to stand up and correct him? Out of these considerations, Jiang Pingji discussed with the officials and tried to seek common ground while reserving differences. The salted fishes were lectured by her. Countless ellipses appeared on the bullet screen. Finally, an ancient big shot spoke their minds. Gui Kai Guo Fengxiu, I understand the logic, but is this your reason for being narcissistic and shameless? I've seen shameless people, but I've never seen someone as shameless as the streamer. Her skin is thicker than the corners of the Great Wall of China. Even missiles can't penetrate it. Jiang Pingji said, this is called knowing one's own limitations. Everyone should reflect deeply on themselves, understand themselves, and face themselves squarely. After a deep reflection, I have to admit that I'm really King outstanding. The salted fishes were speechless. Tutu Feicho, streamer, take your medicine. Brainless pills aren't expensive. Don't give up on treatment. For a moment, this sentence was repeated by countless salted fishes. They wished they could shake Jiang Pingji awake and make her more normal. Fortunately, Jiang Pingji wasn't invincible. There were still people who could deal with her. When Wei Ci and the others received the news and rushed over, Jiang Pingji, who was still trembling with quick-wittedness, immediately restrained herself and became steady and dignified. I received an urgent summons just now. Did something big happen outside? When Yang Si rushed over, he was gasping for breath and barely managed to speak a coherent sentence. Since most of the people are here, I'll say it. Jiang Pingji looked around and took out the secret letter sent by Qiguan Rang. She said, I just received an urgent report from Wenjing from Zhangjiang Pass. It's difficult for me to make a decision on my own, so I called everyone here to discuss it together. She asked everyone to pass on the urgent report and read it. Wei Ci and the others still looked calm, but their eyes were wide open. However, the others didn't have enough willpower. Their breathing quickened as they read it. After a long while, an old general stepped forward and cupped his fists. My lord, I think that Zhongzhou is in internal strife and its fate has come to an end. This is the best time for us to send troops to attack Zhongzhou. Our army has millions of elites. We control Dongqing and Nanxing. If we can take Zhongzhou into our own hands, the world will be ours. Qiguan Rang's battle report was very simple. In general, it said that Zhongzhao had been completely defeated. He also analyzed the general situation within Zhongzhao. In the end, he concluded that if they sent troops to attack Zhongzhao now, it wouldn't be a problem to take 30% of the territory. Zhongzhao was located in the hinterland of the Central Plains. The weather was warm and there were countless fertile fields. It was definitely the fattest piece of meat. A group of people were itching to try and fight. Their lord had already taken down Nanxing, but they were still at Zhangjiang Pass. The feudal vassals of Zhongzhao were at loggerheads with each other. It was really frustrating. The voices calling for war were too loud. Qiguan Rang and Sun Wen were urged to send troops by many people. They had no choice but to send an urgent report for Jiang Pingji to decide. Chapter 1726. The old general said, "Opportunity knocks. If we give Zhongzhao time to recover, it will be difficult for us to attack again in the future." Jiang Pingji had poached this old general from Yang Tao's former subordinates. The old general was experienced in battle, but he was not old at heart. He was very active on the battlefield, the kind of person who dreamed of achieving military merits. It wasn't that he loved fighting, it was just that the old man didn't like to lose and always liked to compete with the young. He had gone from Yang Tao's former subordinate to Jiang Pingji's surrendered general. He had made some achievements in the Battle of Anshui, but he wasn't satisfied. He felt that he was still at his peak. He could draw a two-pickle heavy bow, and his archery was accurate. Now that there was a battle to fight, he felt full of fighting spirit. Based on his understanding of his lord, she was definitely pro-war. She wouldn't let go of this opportunity. The old general's words echoed many people's thoughts. The enemy was dying. Of course, it was time to take advantage of the situation and kill them. Without another word, they pulled up their pants and started fighting. What was there to delay? They were eager to start a fight. They were even more eager than Jiang Pingji. Well, this was probably what it meant by birds of a feather flocking together. With such a lord, even if her subordinates were all Buddhists, they would still be the Buddha of victory. After hearing the old general's words, everyone had different reactions. Some nodded, but Wei Xi and the others looked hesitant. Admittedly, this was a good opportunity to take down Zhongzhao, but Yan Lin looked at the old general and sighed. "Master Lu, my opinion is slightly different from yours." The old general's face darkened when he heard this. The generals were in charge of fighting, but Yan Lin and the other strategists were the ones who gave advice and suggestions. The opinions of the latter determined whether the former could fight or not. The old general suppressed his dissatisfaction and said, "Does Advisor Yan think it's not a good time to send troops?" Yan Lin smiled. He first complimented the old general, saying that his eagerness to do meritorious service for Jiang Pingji was commendable. This showed that the old general was loyal and fought bravely. The old general's expression softened, but he changed the topic. Yan Lin said, "But I don't think the time is right. Master Lu, you still have Nanxing to govern. If we add Zhongzhao, it will be a burden." The old general was dissatisfied. How can Zhongzhao be considered a burden? Yan Lin said, "Within the borders of Zhongzhao, the feudal vassals are at war with each other. Everywhere is devastated after the war. If Lord Lu takes over Zhongzhao, don't you want to govern it? Although our army has 1,000,000 soldiers, there are less than 500,000 true elites. The remaining 500,000 are inexperienced soldiers. These military forces were enough to protect Dongqing and Nanxing, but if Zhongzhao was to be added to the mix, it would instead drag down the overall combat power. Our army has been fighting for many years and needs time to recuperate and recover. If we forcefully send out troops and divide our forces, it will instead give the enemy an opportunity to take advantage of us." The timing was tempting, but Yan Lin didn't agree with sending troops. For example, Jiang Pingji had just eaten a table of delicacies called nanxing. She was very, very full, but at that moment, the kitchen served another table of delicacies that were even more delicious, but in larger portions. Should Jiang Pingji eat it or not? If she ate it, she would be completely stuffed. Not only would she not be able to taste the delicacy, but she would also have to experience the pain of her stomach bursting. Moreover, there were also two enemies holding machetes and clubs by her side. She had eaten so much that she couldn't even walk. What would she do if the enemies came to beat her up? If she didn't eat, she would slowly digest the food from the previous table and then enjoy the next one. Even if the food was cold, it would still fill her up and give her the energy to kill the enemies who were eyeing her covetously. The old general and the others were tempted by the timing and completely forgot that they were still suffering from indigestion. But Yan Lin and the others didn't ignore it. Yan Lin explained in detail, but the old general didn't agree. If we miss this opportunity, it will be difficult to take over Zhongzhou again. Opportunities were only valuable if they were seized. How could they let go of such a great opportunity? Fortunately, he wasn't the only one who thought the same as Yan Lin. Feng Zhen and the others also thought the same. They all agreed with Yan Lin's suggestion. They really shouldn't send out troops now. It was more important to rest and recuperate. Sending out troops to expand their territory could wait. Yang Xi also made a suggestion. He suggested that Qiguan Rang and the others continue to stir up trouble in Zhongzhou. The more chaotic the situation, the better. Of course, they had to take into account the movements of Beiyuan and Xichang at the same time. The situation in these two countries was similar to what Wei Xi knew in his previous life. But because of time constraints, the two countries hadn't become as fragile as cicada's wings. If Beiyuan and Xichang coveted Zhongzhou, they could still squeeze out some troops. Qiguan Rang and the others didn't put in so much effort to destroy Zhongzhou just to benefit Beiyuan and Xichang. The old general was a little stubborn and couldn't accept such an explanation. Who could predict the future without leaving any loopholes? If they missed this opportunity, who knew what other changes would happen? They understood the old general's concerns, but the current situation didn't allow them to send out troops. Jiang Pingji listened to the debate below her emotionlessly, as if what they were talking about had nothing to do with her. After about an hour, the voices of those who wanted to fight gradually became softer. Then she spoke up to interrupt the debate. She first affirmed the pros and cons of the two views, then expressed her thoughts. Jiang Pingji didn't agree to send out troops either. Why? Because sharpening the axe wouldn't delay the work of cutting firewood. From preparing for the battle against Nieliang to attacking Yangtao to attacking Inchui, she'd been fighting for almost 3 years. There hadn't been much rest in between. During this period, there was even a food shortage because of Inchui's schemes. She'd relied on extreme measures to overcome the crisis. She wanted to continue fighting, but the logistics couldn't keep up. If she insisted on going her own way, she would have to temporarily put aside the governance of Nanxing. Jiang Pingji was very clear that there were many opposing voices in various parts of Nanxing. If she relaxed her control over Nanxing, these voices would immediately cause trouble. Even if he couldn't hurt her, he could act like a housefly and annoy her to the point where her mind was in a mess. Zhongzhou was indeed a piece of juicy meat, but she was afraid of indigestion if she ate it now. Qiguan Rang probably meant to wait and see, but the wolf cubs who wanted to fight were too agitated. Qiguan Rang, who thought he was a middle-aged man, and Sunwen, who represented the elderly, felt that they were too old and couldn't stand the wolf cubs coaxing and pestering. They simply asked Jiang Pingji for her opinion. Based on their understanding of their lord, she would most likely choose the conservative plan this time. With her words, those howling wolf cubs could also calm down for a while. At the same time, they revealed the situation in Baiyuan to Jiang Pingji. Chapter 1727. The strategists broke down the logic and explained it to them. The group of warmongers, whose adrenaline was surging, finally calmed down a little. Thinking about it carefully, the strategists' words were very reasonable, but they had to watch helplessly as a great opportunity to render meritorious service slipped through their fingers. Their hearts ached to the point of no return. It was like a charming beauty or a handsome man. The other party had already stripped naked, washed up, and greeted them on the bed. If they didn't do it, it was too disrespectful. As a man, how could he say that he couldn't do it at such a time? Not only was the old general aggrieved, but Yang Tao, Li Yun, and the others were also itching to do it. Even though they weren't the doves or the radical pro-war faction, they weren't peace-loving peace laureates either. If there was a war, they would fight. If there wasn't, they would rest. Being a general was a high-risk occupation that could last for 3 years if you didn't make a profit for 3 years. The opportunity was right in front of them, but they couldn't fight. For these energetic old men, it was a little aggrieved. Holding it in for too long was harmful to their health. Especially Li Yun, Yang Tao, and Xie Zhe, who were in their prime. They urgently needed to achieve meritorious service and accumulate future capital for the children at home. For a general, what could be more useful than meritorious service to advance their career? Jiang Pingji looked at the distinct expressions and attitudes of the civil officials and generals. She felt a little complicated. Were all her subordinates so warlike? The salted fishes expressed, "Tudu Feicho, warlike or not, don't you have any idea? What kind of master would have what kind of subordinates? Birds of a feather flock together." This was not just a saying. Jiang Pingji was essentially in the pro-war faction. Under her influence, regardless of whether it was the strategists or the military, their attitudes were inclined towards violence. If they couldn't talk, they would talk with their fists. Some of the old generals who were originally rather easygoing were led astray by her. The outcome of the meeting was basically decided. War was inevitable, but for now, the priority was to recuperate and train the troops. In order to appease this group of restless generals, Jiang Pingji said a lot of beautiful words and coaxed them. The salted fish in the streaming room couldn't help but complain. She was the head of dissemination and marketing who was held back by the great ambition of hegemony. It would be a waste of her talent if she didn't brainwash people. According to their judgment, there would definitely be no war next year. All of their work and energy would be focused on the construction and restoration of Nanxing. At the same time, they would observe the situation in Zhongzhou and guard against the movements of Xichang and Baiyuan. Since more than half of the people had arrived, Jiang Pingji decided to continue the meeting and discuss the overall work for the next year. Needless to say, Wei Ci and the rest were busy from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Xie Zhe and the other generals who held military power were not idle either, or it could be said that their tasks were even more arduous than Wei Ci and the rest. Yan Lin had said that Jiang Pingji had 1 million soldiers under her command. Among them, there were 500,000 elite soldiers and 500,000 miscellaneous soldiers. In fact, this number was not accurate. 1 million soldiers was just an empty statement that Yan Lin made up. It was an unspoken rule in the industry to exaggerate. No one would argue with Yan Lin even if he said so. If she really had that many soldiers, Jiang Pingji would have nothing to worry about. She would directly lead her people to sweep across Zhongzhou and beat up the 2 sons of Cheese, Xichang and Baiyuan. A rough calculation showed that Jiang Pingji really had 1 million soldiers, but they were not heroic soldiers. Including the troops stationed at Zhangjiang Pass and other places in Dongqing, Jiang Pingji had more than 500,000 soldiers under her command. She could mobilize 250,000 to 60,000 soldiers. It seemed like a small number, but all of them were elites who could go to the battlefield. They had actual combat training every few days to maintain good combat qualities. Ever since she had taken the captives from Enfu, the ratio of elites had plummeted. The number of soldiers under her control had increased by 1 or 2 times, but most of them were miscellaneous soldiers with poor combat qualities. They were even water troops, who took advantage of the situation to fish in troubled waters. Other than bringing them to the battlefield, waving flags and shouting battle cries, they could only run away. Jiang Pingji really looked down on them. If the original soldiers were compared to bodybuilders, ever since the captives were added, the bodybuilders' beautiful and tight muscles were gone. All they had was excess fat, and their agility was not as good as before. Jiang Pingji planned to take advantage of the year of recuperation to further streamline the troops. Streamlining the troops was essentially to reduce the military power in the hands of the generals and reduce the number of troops they commanded. Regarding Jiang Pingji's suggestion, the elders were slightly surprised, but they had no objections. However, the new recruits who had surrendered in the past 1 or 2 years did not quite agree with it. They naturally would not use the reason of, "My lord, you're doing this to reduce the number of soldiers under our command." The generals were not simple-minded warriors with well-developed limbs. The generals who could command the troops were no less scheming than the strategists. If Jiang Pingji had not paid special attention to division of labor and cooperation, the power of the generals would have been much greater than it was now. From before to after the war, the commander-in-chief was basically the core, and the strategists supported him from the side. However, their lord was different from others. While limiting the military power of the generals, she also limited the rights of the strategists. The two checked and balanced each other and assisted each other. Perhaps, this was also considered a characteristic. It would be fine once one got used to it. The reasons given by the generals who opposed streamlining the troops were also very convincing. After a year of recuperation, they could mobilize their troops against Zhongzhou. They might even face the covetous eyes of Xichang and Beiyuan. They could not wait to recruit young and strong men into the army. How could they streamline the troops at this time? They should not streamline the troops. They should continue to recruit. How could Jiang Pingji not see through their little schemes? Don't forget that Jiang Pingji was also a legitimate general. She might not understand the strategist's little schemes, but she could definitely grasp the pulse of these generals. A general should be scheming, not brave. Soldiers should be valued for their quality, not for their quantity. Jiang Pingji asked with a smile, "All of you are experienced generals on the battlefield. How can you not even understand this principle? Why didn't Chui suffer a crushing defeat? There are many reasons. I believe all of you have studied them carefully." And Chui only thought that with more troops, he would be invincible and invincible. Little did he know that by doing so, he had left behind a fatal hidden danger for himself. These miscellaneous soldiers with varying combat qualities, how could their combat power on the battlefield be worthy of Enchui's expenditure of rations? A group of useless good-for-nothings, but they ate quite a lot. Fortunately, Enchui died early. If this dragged on for another year or so, I'm afraid he would be so angry that he would be filled with regret. As the Lord, Jiang Pingji indeed respected her subordinates, but everyone had to admit that this lord's mouth was too cheap. Tongli Jianxue, soldiers should be valued for their quality, not their quantity. I can understand this. However, why did the streamer add, "A general should be scheming, not brave"? Gue Kai Guofengxiu, I'm betting on a spicy strip. This fellow is mocking his own generals and asking them to study more while they are recuperating. What did Jun, Kiki, if I were one of the generals, would have thrown my cup and rebelled against the streamer. Chapter 1728. Remember me, believe me, you're definitely not the only one with such thoughts, but the key is that they can't beat the streamer. Qingran Cho-hun, looks like I'm the only one who realized that the streamer is whipping poor and Chui's corpse again. He's already dead and his corpse is cold. Every now and then, his corpse is dragged out by his old enemy to be whipped. It's really pitiful. The veins on Wei Si's forehead bulged. He was afraid that his lord would continue to diss the generals, so he stepped out to smooth things over. I have some doubts. How does my lord intend to streamline? Jiang Pingji said, Nanxing is in a period of prosperity. Countless wastelands are in urgent need of reclamation and farming. People are needed everywhere. What I mean is for the disabled soldiers to receive subsidies. Those who can return to their original homes will go back to their original homes. Those who are unwilling to return will be sent to various places to farm and reclaim land. The regulations will be modeled after the civilian army. They will be loaned farm tools, cattle, and improved seeds at a low price to encourage people to return to their original homes. Jiang Pingji continued, those who are strong and have no disabilities, first ask them if they have the intention to return to their original homes to farm. If they want to leave, they will be given some dry rations and copper coins. If they want to stay, they will be handed over to the various battalions to be trained as new soldiers. We do need a large number of young and strong men to expand our military strength, but we also need them to farm the farmlands. Otherwise, where will our army's provisions come from? She made it very clear. Everyone understood her considerations and naturally no longer objected. Fengzhen added, those who are over 40 years old will also be sent back. The old general was unhappy. What's wrong with being over 40 years old? Are you looking down on the elderly? Feng Longzi's answer was a model of public relations. He replied with a smile, most of those over 40 years old are treasures. It's a waste to keep them in the army. The old general felt much better. Why do you say that? Before soldiers join the army, most of them work in the fields. The older they are, the longer they work in the fields. Naturally, they will accumulate more experience. If we let these old people with farming experience return to the fields to guide us in reclaiming wastelands and sowing seeds, their value will be much greater than fighting on the battlefield. Fengzhen smiled and asked the old general, does the old general agree with what I said? The old general nodded. Yes. After the meeting ended, Jiang Pingji wrote a reply to Qiguan Rang. Everyone was extremely busy. These soldiers could not be dismissed at will. At least they would have food to eat if they stayed in the barracks. If they left the barracks, they might starve to death. Jiang Pingji said she was going to dismiss them. Many of the injured soldiers who had been captured were anxious and uneasy. The water army, who were eating and drinking and waiting for death, were even more insecure. Although there was no trouble, the atmosphere in the barracks was still very tense. If it was not handled well, there might be chaos. Because of this matter, Yang Tao and the others were very busy. It's easier to invite a god and then to send him away. If we don't handle it properly, there will be chaos everywhere. Yang Tao was so worried that he lost a lot of his hair. Yan Lin was also busy. He thought about it and decided to seek advice from Li Yun and the others. Li Yun said, this is not difficult. There is already a set of rules. General Yang, just use it. Only now did Yang Tao realize that Li Yun, Xia Zhe, and the others were rather free. The troops under their command were all old veterans. There were not many new captives and new soldiers, so the workload of streamlining the troops was naturally not that great. Yang Tao really found the right people to seek advice from them. When Jiang Pingji was in Dongqing, she had established a set of relatively complete resettlement plans for the soldiers who had retired. After many years of trial and error, it had improved a lot. All he had to do was make some changes to this plan and it could be used. Simply reducing the troops would definitely not work. It would cause panic among the soldiers. Yang Tao should properly publicize it to let the soldiers know that being laid off and going home did not mean that no one would care about them. The barracks had found a good opportunity for them to be laid off. If they went home to open up wastelands and farm, the officials could rent farming tools, cattle, and improved seeds at a low price. If they did not have money to rent, the officials could temporarily put them on credit. For the first 3 years, their share of the grain would be more favorable than that of the civilian troops. Jiangpingji's civilian troops had always received good benefits. If they rented the government's improved seeds, cattle, and farming tools, the government would take 40% of the grain for the autumn harvest, and the people would take 60%. If each household provided their own tools, the government would only take 30% of the grain, and the people could keep 70%. If this batch of soldiers were laid off, they could rent the government's tools on credit and keep 70% of the grain after the autumn harvest. This ratio would be considered light even in times of peace, not to mention the current chaotic times. With such good treatment, the originally frightened soldiers were also relieved. What moved the soldiers even more was that Jiangpingji also gave a higher discount to the disabled soldiers. For the first 3 years of farming, the government would only take 10% of the grain. If they were physically unable to farm, they would be given priority in some jobs to ensure their survival as much as possible. As soon as this news came out, faint cries sounded in the barracks under the night sky. It made Yang Tao's hair stand on end. It's really a fair loss. Yang Tao rubbed the goosebumps and tried to calm them down. Once again, he sighed with emotion at Jiangpingji's method of winning people's hearts. No wonder she dared to directly diss the General Reed more. It was really because she was loved and hated by people. But, it's the people's good fortune to meet her. Although her temper was a bit bad, she was indeed a kind and wise ruler. The world was in her hands, and the people could live a stable and prosperous life. After a few words, Yang Tao continued to be busy with his work and took the time to study. After a few days, the cold gradually became stronger. Yang Tao received a letter from his wife, whom he had not seen for a long time. There was a small footprint on it. Xiaoyang, look, Yang Tao was wearing a heavy armor. When he walked, the armor made a loud and rhythmic sound. Look at what? Yan Lin did not even raise his head. Yang Tao grinned. As he spoke, the white fog disappeared from between his teeth. Footprints. Your eldest nephew's footprints are a bit bigger. This kid grows up really fast. Yan Lin was speechless. Yang Tao said, in a few years, I will be able to teach him how to ride a horse and shoot an arrow. Yan Lin pretended to be indifferent. It's still early. Yang Tao said to himself, when he's 14 or 15 years old, I can find him a wife. Which family do you think will be good? Yan Lin said, it's still early. Yang Tao said, it's late. I'm late. The good candidates have all been chosen. If he could, Yang Tao would have arranged a marriage for his son while he was still in his mother's womb. Yan Lin raised his eyebrows. He felt that his friend was not in a good mood, so he asked if he was upset. He did manage to get some gossip out of her. It's the son of Feng Longzi. I heard that he's getting married in 2 years. Marriages in gentry families were usually prepared a few years in advance. 2 years was considered a rush. Yan Lin corrected him, that's Feng Zhen. How can you call him that? He was in a hurry to start a feud. Yang Tao said, guess who the bride's family is? Yan Lin did not know. The eldest daughter of the Feng family in Shangyang. TSK. He's really lucky. Yan Lin nodded in agreement. He's really lucky. Chapter 1729. Yang Tao was not a simple-minded person. He couldn't help but exclaim, "I heard that the daughter of the Feng family is the only legitimate wife of the Feng family in this generation. She's the real deal. If it were 10 or 20 years ago, she would have been the mother of the world." She really didn't know what kind of great luck Feng Longzi had to be able to enter the eyes of the Feng clan. "I heard that Feng Jin is a very upright person. How could he tolerate Feng Jin? He only had one precious son. Of course, he wanted to give him the best." Yang Tao's eyes turned red at the thought of his son marrying and having children. He stared at the daughters of other families. Which girl would become his son's wife in the future? At the thought of his son marrying and having children, the word betrothal gift popped up in Yang Tao's head. Marrying a wife was expensive. Not only did she need power and wealth, but she also needed money. As a father, he had to earn enough for his son. Mother of the world. Yan Lin couldn't help but sneer. How could the Feng family be interested in a so-called empress? Back then, the emperor of Dongqing had traded the position of Zhao Yi for a concubine's daughter. Chongqing was the daughter of the legitimate wife, and she was the honorable eldest daughter of the legitimate wife. How could the empress of Dongqing's level enter her eyes? It was clear that Feng Jin had hit the jackpot. Yang Tao didn't understand. Neither did Yan Lin. How did Feng Jin and Feng Jin become in-laws? Apart from their brains, their personalities and backgrounds were completely different. Feng Jin was from a noble family. How could he be willing to marry his precious daughter to a family like Feng Jin? Did he get kicked in the head by a donkey? Or maybe Jiang Pingji was the middleman? Yang Tao didn't hide his envy. Sigh. Feng Longzi will be a grandfather in 5 or 6 years. I don't even know where my future daughter-in-law is. He heard that Feng Yi and Chongqing were childhood friends. They had been close since they were young. They had nurtured each other well. Childhood sweethearts, the two of them were innocent. It sounded so beautiful. From the time they were young to the time they spent together, experiencing it once would not be a waste of their lives. Yan Lin rolled his eyes at his friend and said gently, "Didn't you get engaged to Yang Xi's daughter for your nephew?" Yang Tao was stunned. He asked, "Yang Xi's daughter? When did that happen? Why didn't he remember?" Yan Lin sighed and reminded Yang Tao. At the same time, he felt sorry for his nephew. With a father with such a bad memory, a good marriage was almost ruined. Previously, when Yang Xi, as an emissary, was discussing the matter of allegiance with Yang Tao and the others, the two of them had joked about the two families becoming in-laws. Of course, Yang Xi was reluctant, and Yang Tao didn't take it seriously either. It was all thanks to Yan Lin's jesting, which put Yang Xi in a dilemma. In the end, he vaguely agreed to this childish betrothal. Yang Xi felt that this was a joke, and he would forget it after a long time. Unfortunately, Yan Lin had a good memory. After his reminder, Yang Tao recalled that there was indeed such a thing. Isn't that just a joke? Yang Tao scratched his head. He did not take this child's marriage seriously. Yan Lin said, "But aren't you worried about your nephew's marriage? Among the sons of the civil and military families under Lu Gong's banner, there are more men than women. It is not easy for you to find a man of the same age for your eldest nephew who is also of the same social status. Or could it be that Jingzi dislikes Yang Xi for being of low birth and not being a good match?" Marriage was not only a matter of 2 children, but also a matter of 2 families. If Yang Tao had such a grudge against Yang Xi, Yan Lin would not continue to pay attention to Yang Xi's children. If he was not careful, he would become enemies. Strangely enough, the civil and military officials under Jiang Pingji's command had more daughters in the early years. Most of the second and third births were sons. That was why there were more men than women in the same generation as Yang Tao's sons. If Yang Tao wanted to find an in-law among them, the earlier he did it, the better. If he was late, he could only pick up the leftovers. Why would I? It's just that the children are still young. Will they blame me when they grow up? Yan Lin was speechless. Yang Tao was the one who wanted a child's marriage, and now he was the one who said that an arranged marriage was not a good idea. It was getting harder and harder to please. Yang Tao could read the disdain on his friend's face. He could not help but smile and try to fool him. Although he said that, Yang Tao still seriously considered Yang Xi's daughter. The more he thought about it, the more he was tempted. Yang Tao was a man of action. He felt that Yang Xi's daughter was indeed a good choice, so he was going to beat around the bush. He thought that his question was very vague, but in front of Yang Xi, it was as clear as day. Yang Xi avoided Yang Tao for a few days. When he could not avoid him anymore, he pretended to be deaf and dumb and pretended that he did not understand. If Jiang Nongqi knew that he had accidentally betrothed his daughter to someone else, wouldn't she beat him to death? Jiang Pingji heard the commotion between the two of them. She asked casually. Yang Xi was a civil official, while Yang Tao was a military general. The latter's identity was also very sensitive. Even the slightest disturbance could not be treated as an ordinary matter. If the two of them had a disagreement, it would be difficult to deal with. Yang Xi was brought to Jiang Pingji for questioning. He could only smile bitterly and tell her what had happened. Jiang Pingji could not help but laugh. Are you saying that you decided on your daughter's marriage without Nongqin's consent? Yang Xi defended himself. Wasn't that a joke? Who knew that Yang Jingze would take it seriously? Jiang Pingji said, children's marriage should be based on the child's wishes. It's useless for you two rough men to be anxious at the side. Yang Xi said, Xi thinks so too, but the child is still so young. I really don't know why Yang Jingze is so anxious. Jiang Pingji thought of Feng Zhen, who had been walking with the wind recently. She could not help but laugh. It's probably because he's been agitated. In terms of age, Feng Zhen was not the oldest among them, but who asked him to get married early and have children early? Feng Yi was sensible and intelligent. The marriage that she had decided on was the best. She took away the most beautiful cabbage from Feng Jin's family. No wonder Feng Zhen was so smug. It made those who had sons at home anxious. But then again, on the surface, Yang Tao is an excellent candidate for in-laws. Yang Xi said, that's true, but we still have to inform Nongqin. After all, a daughter's household registration followed her mother's. As a biological father, Yang Xi really did not have the right to take charge of his daughter's marriage. Speaking of this, he was very sad. Fu Wang could still coax and pester Hui Jun to relent. If Yang Xi and Feng Zhen had not pushed Fu Wang to the position of commander-in-chief, he would have married a beautiful woman a long time ago. Yang Xi was miserable. Jiang Nongqin was unmoved by force or persuasion. So far, she had no intention of giving Yang Xi a status. Yang Xi always had the illusion that he was Jiang Nongqin's mistress. When she had needs, she would come and sleep with him. When she pulled up her pants, she would not recognize him. Thinking of this, Yang Xi looked at his lord with deep resentment in his eyes. When does my lord plan to have a young lord? Chapter 1730. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, why are you suddenly asking about this? Yang Xi begged in a low voice, please put it on the agenda as soon as possible. You look forward to the young lord so much. Yang Xi deliberated and said, the matter of children is my lord's family matter. As an official, it's inconvenient for me to say too much. Jiang Pingji could not help but roll her eyes at Yang Xi. Why was he so nosy when he knew it was her family matter? Yang Si changed the topic. It's just that Nongqin is always thinking about you, my lord. She bluntly said that you haven't got a family yet. How can she be one step ahead of you? Jiang Pingji was speechless. In that case, Yang Si's singleness was her fault. Yang Si was speechless. Didn't his lord have any idea who the culprit was? Fortunately, the other party was a woman. If it was a man, Yang Si really doubted whether his group of officials would be able to get out of singleness. Would their brains be green after getting out of singleness? His lord's charm was too great. She was attractive to both men and women. Yang Si was so jealous that his eyes turned red. Others hastened their marriage for the young lord, but he hastened it for the sake of getting out of singleness. Cough cough. We'll talk about this another day. Yang Si's eyes were filled with hidden bitterness. They were all adults. The phrase, "we'll talk about it another day," was meaningful. Yang Si knew that there would be no result for the time being. He could only give up and choose to save the country indirectly from Wei Ci. However, Wei Ci was also a slippery old fox. A cunning rabbit has 3 burrows. How could it be so easy to catch him? On the other hand, Jiang Nongqin received the news that Yang Si had arranged a child marriage for her daughter. When she saw the letter, she raised her eyebrows and pursed her lips into a line. She seemed to be suppressing her anger. Right now, she really wanted to cut Yang Si into 8 pieces. If not for the fact that she could not leave, she might have killed her way over alone. Yang Tao, after her anger subsided, Jiang Nongqin also seriously thought about the contents of the letter. In all fairness, Yang Si had a good eye for people. Yang Tao was once a feudal lord. His ancestors had a strong foundation. According to the current standards, this child marriage was still a girl who was out of her league. In this era, people did not pay much attention to free love. Arranged marriages were the mainstream. At the same time, they also paid attention to matching families. Family background was an important criterion for marriage. Yang Tao's son was still young and his aptitude could not be seen. However, just by looking at his parents, Yang Tao and Yan Xushuan's father's generation were dragons and phoenixes among men. No matter how bad their children were, they could not be that bad. On the other hand, his daughter's family background was indeed much weaker. In the future, it would be difficult for her to find such a good partner. Ah Liang. Just as Jiang Nongqin stuffed the letter into her pocket, she heard her daughter's childish voice calling out to her. She got up and walked out of the study. Looking for the source of the sound, she saw that at the end of the corridor, her 3-headed daughter was twisting her way towards her. Her sparse and soft short hair was tied into 3 bundles, making her pink round face look even more comical and adorable. Behind the daughter was a personal maid and wet nurse. The 2 of them looked as if they wanted to support the daughter but didn't dare to. They stretched out their hands at any time, ready to catch this precious baby. The coldness on Jiang Nongqin's face melted instantly, as if it had met the warm sun. Ah Liang. With a childish voice, little dumpling struggled to walk to her feet, opened her arms, and hugged her legs. This was still too long for her. In addition to the cold wind blowing outside, her chubby cheeks blushed. Jiang Nongqin held the little girl up and could clearly smell the milk fragrance on her. Ah Liang. Seeing that her mother ignored her, Tuanzi persistently shouted, trying to get a response. Probably because she was born in a family of generals, the child was stronger than her peers since she was born. She also learned to walk faster than her peers. Now, she could walk steadily and speak early. Although she couldn't speak clearly, she was a chatterbox. She would shout whenever she caught someone, and she could talk for a long time. As for this, she probably took after her father. Jiang Nongqin casually weighed the child in her hand. The heavy weight made her feel better. The wet nurse was worried. Madam, the eldest lady insisted on coming out. We couldn't stop her. Jiang Nongqin was very open-minded. Children from a family of generals were thick-skinned and didn't need to be so meticulous. It's cold now, so she needs to wear more clothes. If she wants to go out, let her walk around. Remember to keep warm and away from dangerous places. The wet nurses were really meticulous. The child was covered in layers of clothes, so she wasn't afraid of the cold at all. Ah, Liang. Tuanzi put her hands on both sides of Jiang Nongqin's cheeks discontentedly, as if she wanted to turn her face to herself. She was calling for her mother. How could her mother ignore her? Jiang Nongqin smiled and said, I'm here. You have such a bad temper. What should you do in the future? She patted her daughter's plump butt and took her into the house with a smile. Tuanzi looked around curiously. As soon as Jiang Nongqin put her down, she ran around with her little legs. Come here, come to me. Tuanzi was very obedient, but she ran too far away from Jiang Nongqin. It took some time to run there, so she simply rolled over. She was dressed so thickly that she looked like a dumpling. She didn't stop until she rolled to Jiang Nongqin's feet, giggling. Your father has found a marriage for you. Tuanzi tilted her head and repeated blankly, Father. Jiang Nongqin said, Yes, it's your unreliable father who arranged a marriage for you without permission. Tuanzi didn't understand. She couldn't help laughing when she heard the word father. She looked around as if she was looking for someone. Jiang Nongqin asked her, Are you satisfied with this marriage? Tuanzi didn't know how to look up at her. Most men in the world are the same. It all depends on how they are raised. Jiang Nongqin fiddled with the hair on her daughter's head and muttered to herself, I heard that Yang Tao is a rare handsome man. I don't know how his wife looks, but her surname is Yan and she's Yan Lin's younger sister. She's pretty too. The son of these two must be good-looking. He's well-educated. He's not bad, her mother was talking to herself. Tuanzi sat on the mat and lowered her head to play with the accessories on her mother's waist. When the other party wasn't paying attention, she got close to her head and stuck out her tongue to lick it. Poof! Tuanzi stuck out her tongue and her little face was full of disgust. When she was disgusted, her mother hooked her finger and gently scratched her soft chin. Instead of choosing an unknown person, it's better to raise a person who knows everything about him. What do you think? After the anger subsided, Jiang Nongqin made a lot of plans. The more she thought about it, the more she felt it was a good marriage. Most of the time, it would be a blind marriage. The situation of the husband's family depended on the investigation and the mouth of the matchmaker. Instead of that, it would be better to pick one from the younger generation and know everything about him. Jiang Nongqin made the decision and immediately wrote a reply to Yang Si. Yang Si read the letter and had mixed feelings. Chapter 1731. Naturally, Yang Si could not hide these things from Jiang. After all, Jiang Nongqin was her #1 fan and she had almost no secrets. Yang Si had just received a letter from his family. Ji Ho Jiao also received a greeting letter from her #1 hardcore fan. This letter was twice as thick as Yang Si's. It was very thick and heavy. Jiang Nongqin also roughly explained her little plan and vaguely asked for his opinion. No matter what Yang Tao's current status was, he was still a former feudal lord. It was one thing for him to marry an ordinary landowning household, but it just had to be Jiang Yu. Ji Yunshu had 2 important civil and military subordinates. In a way, there was a political element to this marriage. If they wanted to get married, they would have to ask for their lord's opinion. The Lord made the decision and nodded. Only then could this child marriage be considered a clear path. Ginger. Ji grabbed Yang Si and smiled. In this world, I'm afraid only you and your wife would dare to raise Xing's son as a child son-in-law. When Yang Si heard the word husband and wife, his eyes lit up. He was obviously very happy, but he still pretended to be reserved. Since ancient times, there have only been child brides. How could there be a child son-in-law? Yang Si said, if General Yang hears this, I'm afraid that not only will the marriage not succeed, but he will also become enemies. But, if I think about it carefully, this is indeed a good marriage. In the end, it's still his loss. How could there be a loss in this matter? Ginger. Ji Yunshu said with a smile, how can you and Nongqin be worse than Yang Jingze? In my opinion, he's the one who got the better end of the stick. According to the perspective of this era, this marriage was indeed for Yang Si's side. If one were to analyze it in detail, the result would be hard to say. Yang Tao's advantages were obvious, but so were his flaws. The biggest flaw was his identity. Even if it was Ginger. Ji Yunshu did not mind the past and placed him in an important position. The others would also be on guard against Yang Tao and secretly suppress him, and Yang Tao would also restrain himself. He could control the military, but he could not become the #1 person in the army. There was bound to be an even more powerful general above him. For example, in the general ranking in his previous life, Yang Tao was very popular among the landowning households. However, the results left everyone dumbfounded. Yang Tao was ranked 5th. The first was Fu Wang, who came from a humble background and had a bad reputation. This result not only made many of the courtiers heave a sigh of relief, but it also made Yang Tao and his companions heave a sigh of relief. Even if one wanted to be in the limelight, one had to look at the right time and the right place. Not only would there be no benefits in being in the limelight, but it would also bring about a fatal disaster. Being ranked 5th on the general leaderboard wasn't bad either. It wasn't eye-catching, his safety was guaranteed, and he even had a consolation prize to make up for it. The situation in this life was similar. Ginger. Ji Yunshu didn't mind, but Yang Tao couldn't ignore it. If Yang Tao was said to be a partial student, then Jiang Nongqin and Yang Si had a balanced development. Yang Si was Ginger. Ji Ye's trusted advisor would have a high status in the future. At the very least, he would be able to obtain a noble title. As for Jiang Nongqin, needless to say, the reason why the women's battalion could have its current scale and influence was inseparable from her painstaking management. As the leader of the female soldiers, in terms of military power and influence, she was second only to Fu Wang, the commander-in-chief, and suppressed the other generals. Not only could she do whatever she wanted at the front line, but she was also the head of logistics. The casualty camp was her territory. The network she had accumulated was not a joke. Over the years, there were at least 200,000 female soldiers who had enlisted or retired. Among these 200,000 female soldiers, the first in their minds was their lord, Jiang Nongqin. Ji was ranked 2nd, and the first in command, General Jiang Nongqin. This couple had a combination of civil and military skills. How could their political influence be as simple as 1 + 1? As for the issue of their background, both Yang Si and Jiang Nongqin came from humble backgrounds. They were indeed incomparable to Yang Tao's aristocratic family background. However, as long as it was given to Jiang Ji had enough time. She would completely reverse the values of this era that judged a person's value by bloodline and family background. At that time, Yang Tao, who had lost the halo of his family background, would meet this couple. The two families would be in-laws. It was still unknown who would be the one to whom. Yang Si smiled and said, "Of course, General Jiang and I are not inferior." Jiang Ji casually flipped through the documents on the table and pretended to ask inadvertently. What's Xing's attitude on this child marriage? Yang Si thought carefully and sighed. General Yang doesn't have any special thoughts. He's just envious of Zishi's marriage to Huayu's family. In a moment of impulse, he decided on this marriage. As for Yan Xiaoyang, I'm afraid he has a lot of twists and turns. Jiang. Ji could not help but tease. You and Xiaoyang, the two of you are thinking too much. Yang Si's expression was a little unnatural. This was an occupational hazard. They were subconsciously thinking of conspiracy theories. They could not be blamed. Jiang. Ji said, Jingze is simple, but Xiaoyang is not easy to deal with. He has a lot of thoughts. It's called 9 twists and 18 turns. He did not object to this matter and even tried his best to facilitate it. In the end, it's mostly because of Jiang Nongqin's influence in the military camp and here. She summed it up in one sentence. I guess only Jiang Nongqin and Jingze regard this child marriage as a child marriage. If the two families got married, as long as Yang Tao did not court death, he would basically have the golden token of immunity. If Yang Tao and Jiang Nongqin became in-laws, she would be more at ease. Ji made her stand clear, which made her feel more at ease. This was the core meaning of this political child marriage. It was a pity that Yang Si and Yan Lin thought so much that they became bald. However, Yang Tao and Jiang Nongqin were straightforward. The former was happy that he had a daughter-in-law. His son did not have to worry about his marriage when he grew up. The latter was satisfied that her daughter had a child son-in-law. In the future, they could play the game of raising childhood sweethearts. They could raise the child's son-in-law according to the type of husband they liked. Poor Taoist sees your chrysanthemum is poisonous, only Rong and Xiaoyang are seriously fighting with their wits. Their teammates are all idle. Moon Shadow Wander, I also want a partner who can let me win by doing nothing. Since the Lord has no opinion, then this marriage is set. In my opinion, the most important thing is for the children to be in love with each other. Otherwise, they will become bitter couples in the future. Yang Si looked at his lord with a strange look, as if he was very surprised that she also had such a sentimental and naive side. Nowadays, blind and mute marriages are common. It is extremely rare to know a husband or a bride before marriage. If the children grow up together, they will be more affectionate when they are young. Compared to ordinary couples, their relationship will be deeper. No matter what, they won't become bitter couples, right? Yang Si and Jiang. Ji's thinking was not in the same dimension. Jiang. Ji complained, in the future, the atmosphere will become more and more open-minded. Your way of thinking may become outdated in 20 or 30 years. Yang Si said, the most important thing is to be in line with the times. Advanced ideas were destined to not work in an inappropriate context. No matter what would happen in the future, there was nothing wrong with Yang Si's current way of thinking. Where is Zishi? Yang Si said, Lord, have you forgotten? Didn't you agree to his request and transfer him back to Wanzhou? Jiang. Ji's hand paused. She did not know whether to laugh or cry. I just agreed yesterday, and he can't wait to escape today. He could escape today, but he could not escape tomorrow. Chapter 1732. A Letter from the Lord. When Jiang Pingji's letter arrived, Sun Wen was sitting with Qiguan Rang. Because of their positions, the two of them had established a solid revolutionary friendship over the past 2 years. While thinking of ways to sabotage Zhongzhao and provoking them to fight and kill each other, they drank tea, played chess, and chatted. Their days were wonderful. Sun Wen and Qiguan Rang had become close friends who talked about everything. Qiguan Rang tore open the envelope and read the letter carefully. His usually cold face had a hint of a smile. It's still good news. Qiguan Rang handed the letter to Sun Wen. At the same time, he lifted the hem of his clothes and sat down on the mat. He sighed and said, "Since the Lord has spoken, those who like to fight should stop for a while. Isn't it good to train the troops every day? All they think about is fighting and killing." A strange look flashed in Sun Wen's eyes. Fighting and killing. It was rare to hear such words from Qiguan Rang. It made Qiguan Rang sound like a peace ambassador. In fact, he was the best at stirring up trouble. Sun Wen finished reading the letter with a smile. He folded the letter back and carefully put it aside. Aren't young people full of energy? They like to fight and are eager to achieve success. We all know that, Sun Wen said leisurely. But now is not the right time. It's really not good to start fighting. The army is stationed at Zhangjiang Pass. Occasionally, we can send troops to Zhongzhou for a fight, but we can't really start fighting. Beiyuan and Xichang are also eyeing the meat of Zhongzhou. Whoever moves first will become the target of public criticism. Since the Lord has spoken to rest and recuperate, they will understand. Sun Wen and the others were really annoyed by the generals. Communication failed, so they asked Jiang Pingji to make a decision. The two old foxes knew what the outcome would be. They were not surprised by Jiang Pingji's reply. What outcome would be considered an accident? Their lord was like those who were eager to make contributions. When she saw a good opportunity, she wanted to send troops. Reality had proven that their lord was not that kind of person. Her strategy was not inferior to that of the top strategists. With Jiang Pingji's reply, those who were like a stimulant could go to bed and use their extra energy to train the troops. Qiguan Rang's brows relaxed. He said sincerely, "I can finally relax for a while." Sun Wen nodded, and the two continued to brew tea and chat. Compared to Yang Si and the others suffering in Nanxing, Qiguan Rang and Sun Wen's days in Zhangjiang Pass were much better. Most of the chores were handed over to the younger students or the newly promoted newcomers. They only needed to control the general direction. The training of the troops was handed over to a few generals. Their daily routine was to look at the intelligence reports sent from within the borders of Zhongzhou, analyze the situation, and come up with ideas to continue tricking the feudal vassals of Zhongzhou, causing them to either split up, form alliances, or mutilate themselves. Basically, they could get off work and go home before it was dark. Not only that, but they were also so free that they sent people to reorganize the refugees nearby and reclaim the wasteland. They looked like they were going to fight a long war. Old Master Sun Wen was even more extreme. He got a vegetable field and would wake up early every day to take a stroll, watering and fertilizing the seedlings before the sun rose. Not only did he plant vegetables, but he also raised a nest of rabbits and built a medium-sized rabbit house. He planned to eat rabbit meat in hot pot with Qiguan Rang when it snowed. Rather than saying it was a war, it was better to say that it was to experience the life of retirement in advance. According to his own grandson's estimation, Old Master Sun Wen had probably gained about 5 kilograms in the past year. His originally thin cheeks had become rounder. Others might have aged a year, but Old Master Sun Wen seemed to have become 10 years younger. It's good to be idle. This old man won't have any regrets in the future. At least I've enjoyed my old age. Sun Wen sighed and stiffly changed the topic. If there's any regret, it's probably that I couldn't find a good marriage for Prime Minister Lan Lan. Feng Longzi's son is settled, but why is such an obedient child like Lan Lan still single? I don't know how many years this old bag of bones can live, and whether he can see his great-grandchildren. Qiguan Rang lowered his head and looked straight ahead. He feigned ignorance and refused to respond to Old Master Sun Wen's words. A year or two ago, Sun Wen was still quite reserved. At most, he would brag about his grandson Sun Lan in front of him and crazily recommend that Sun Lan was a good candidate for a son-in-law. After they became familiar with each other, old Master Sun Wen was no longer reserved. He would chat awkwardly every day. It was not that Qi Guanrang did not understand what Sun Wen meant, but this concerned his daughter's lifelong happiness. Qi Guanrang did not want to make a hasty decision. Even if Sun Lan was a good young man, he might not be suitable for his daughter. Old Master Sun Wen was anxious, but there was nothing he could do. Who asked his little pig to like the cabbages from other people's vegetable garden? Old Master Sun Wen sighed faintly when he ran into a wall every day. He did not even have the mood to go to the rabbit house to take a look. The rabbit in the rabbit house was caught by his grandson. The old master happened to like furry little things, so he kept it to raise. Rabbits gave birth quickly, so they could eat 2 more hot pot meals in winter. Old Master Sun Wen lived a leisurely life as if he was retired. The few young people and newcomers who were entrusted with important tasks were not so comfortable. Sun Lan was busy until the moon was high in the sky. At this time, the young man's figure had grown a lot. Although he was not burly, he was not weak either. His back was straight, and his face looked thinner than before. His skin was slightly tanned, and his eyebrows were slender and longer than other young men of his age. His almond-shaped eyes carried the unique vigor and sharpness of his age. After more than 2 years of training in the military camp, the shy little boy had become more outgoing and developed in a different direction. Every time old Master Sun Wen saw his grandson like this, he wished he could grind the pearls he collected into powder and apply it on his face. Didn't he know that becoming an official depended on one's appearance? He was so tan that it did not conform to the mainstream aesthetic standards at all. Sun Lan said helplessly, "Lord Lu doesn't care about appearance. Nowadays, the atmosphere is different from when grandfather was still around." Other things aside, Qi Kuang under the Lord's tent was famous for being ugly. His appearance was unworthy of his parents, and his legs were crippled. In the past, with such a condition, he could not even touch the threshold of becoming an official, let alone being placed in an important position. Why is a man so fair? Sun Lan had been in the military camp for a long time, and he increasingly felt that muscles were a man's romance. Unfortunately, due to congenital limitations, he could not train his muscles to the point where he could only tighten his soft abdomen. At this moment, old Master Sun Wen looked at his grandson, who had returned from a long journey, and his old face was about to droop. His grandson was tanned again. If it wasn't for the old man's good eyesight, he probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between his grandson and the Dark Knight. The Lord sent a letter saying that we will probably have to rest for a year next year. Sun Wen pointed at the mat opposite him, indicating for his grandson to sit down and talk. "It's time for you to pick up your studies in the Golden Scale Academy." A trace of astonishment flashed across Sun Lan's eyes. He could not help but sit up straight and straighten his back. "Grandfather, do you mean for me to go back?" Sun Wen nodded and patiently explained to Sun Lan, "The army will have to rest for a whole year. The chores during this period are just repetitive things to you. It's a waste of time to do them. It's better to go back to the Golden Scale Academy and study hard with the teachers to strengthen your foundation." Sun Lan had done well at the front line for the past 2 years. He was more capable and experienced in many things than some of the elders. Chapter 1733. Sun Lan's official career did not mean that he could climb higher just by doing well. He also needed to improve his knowledge and learn how to manage his connections. In the past, the connections in the bureaucracy were mostly made up of the aristocrat's bloodline, but it was different now. Old Master Sun Wen had lived for more than 50 years. His eyes were very sharp. When others were still ignorant, he could see the connection between the Golden Scale Academy and the bureaucracy in the future. If most of the talents cultivated by the Golden Scale Academy entered the bureaucracy in the future, the influence of the aristocrat's bloodline would be weakened. At the same time, the relationships of schoolmates, peers, and peers would become the mainstream in the bureaucracy. Sun Wen did not want his grandson to become a busybody, but the bureaucracy was not something a lone ranger could do. Many times, one needed the support and help of connections. If Sun Lan wanted to become an official to realize his dreams and plead for the people, then the first thing he needed to do was to protect himself. Only then would he have the chance to achieve his dreams. Sun Wen was experienced. He could see through some things. Naturally, he hoped that his grandson would take fewer detours under his guidance. Sun Lan was not as complicated as his grandfather thought. He nodded and agreed. But, I can't bear to leave you, grandfather. You're already so old, yet you're still acting like a spoiled child. Sun Wen was very happy, but he still had to be arrogant. He thought of something and said with a smile, "When you go back, remember to be smarter." Do you know the words that the Lord always says? What words? The pavilion closest to the water enjoys the moonlight first. That's interesting. Sun Wen said, when Zheng's father-in-law is too difficult to deal with. Then you should be smarter and start with his daughter. If you can win the heart of a beauty, when Zheng can't continue to pretend to be deaf and mute. Oh right, there's one thing you have to remember. Don't be reckless and don't overstep your boundaries. If there's someone unfaithful in the Sun family, grandfather won't forgive you. Sun Wen encouraged his grandson to chase after the girl he liked, but he didn't encourage his grandson to be a scumbag. If Sun Lan really did something she shouldn't have done before marriage, according to Qiguan Rang's protective personality, he would definitely fall out with Sun Wen. Sun Wen was old. He did not know how many years he could live. If he went, could Sun Lan defeat Qiguan Rang? He would be torn apart by that old fox in a matter of minutes. Sun Lan was also a youth who had been in the army for 2 years. He was no longer the innocent and naive boy he used to be. He could even understand some dirty words, let alone his grandfather. Once she was nervous, her original nature was exposed again, and her slightly dark complexion revealed a blush. Grandpa, what are you talking about? I'm not that kind of person, Sun Wen snorted. That's for the best. Otherwise, I'm afraid that I'll have to send my son off. Sun Lan. Sun Wen asked, do you know how far Qiguan Rang's daughter can draw a bow? Sun Lan had a bad feeling about this. Qiguan Jinghui was strong from a young age, but this was normal. Girls were stronger than boys in their childhood. How many June? June was the same unit of weight as a stone. 30 Jin was a June, and 4 June was a stone. The so-called strength of 1,000 caddies referred to the strength of 30,000 Jin. It was a metaphor for the strength of an object. Sun Wen's expression was indescribable. He looked at his grandson with pity in his eyes. It's 5 caddies, but I'm still young. In a few years, it won't be this number anymore. What did this mean? This meant that if his grandson really married Qiguan Jinghui, and there was a conflict and domestic violence, Qiguan Jinghui could throw Sun Lan out with one hand. If Sun Lan really liked Qiguan Jinghui and wanted to pursue her, then he had to pursue her seriously and treat her well. Not to mention that Qiguan Jinghui had a super difficult father, she alone was enough to give Sun Lan a hard time. Sun Lan. 5 caddies. 150 caddies. Sun Lan's weight was less than 150 caddies. This shock lingered until the next day, and it even affected his work. There were a bunch of wrong words. Fortunately, the important matters of the military camp were written on bamboo paper. If they were changed to bamboo slips, a single wrong word would waste a lot of time. Feng Yi saw that he was not in the right state of mind, and that things were a mess. She asked out of concern. Why are you frowning? If you're not feeling well, why don't you get off work early and go back to rest? Sun Lan wanted to say something but stopped. He could not help but think about what his grandpa had said. Will it increase in a few years? How do you know? Jinghui doesn't look like she was born with divine strength. Most of the female students in the Golden Scale Academy are like this. Qiguan Jinghui is not the strongest among her peers. She's barely average, barely considered average. Didn't this mean that there was someone stronger than Qiguan Jinghui who could draw a heavier bow? Sun Lan had only heard of Lord Jiang. When she was 12, she used to draw a bow that was more than 1 caddy, which was about 5 caddies. But wasn't that born with divine strength? Why were the female students in the Golden Scale Academy so exaggerated? Wrongly. You've always been in contact with Chongqing, right? Before Feng Yi joined the army, the unreliable Feng Zhen had written a reliable character for his son to use in the coronation ceremony. Those who were familiar with him would call him by his character, which made them more intimate. Yes, what about it? Sun Lan asked, then do you know? Changxing's strength seems to be. Feng Yi's expression was calm. I know. Is there anything wrong? Sun Lan said dejectedly, it takes me a lot of effort to draw a bow that is 1 caddy full. I don't know if Jinghui will like it, Feng Yi said, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. Why bother about this? If you're not as strong as others, just learn to be smarter than others. Sun Lan, brother, you're really open-minded. The problem was, would a girl like a weak chicken that was more useless than herself? Sun Lan had been in the army for a long time. Although he was not infected with the idea of a straight man, he also thought that girls liked men who were bullier. In order to be bullier, he worked hard to gain weight and grow taller. He worked hard to make himself look darker and more masculine, in the end. In the future, when they carried each other, it would most likely be Jinghui hugging him and not him hugging Jinghui. Sad. TSK. Instead of worrying about this, why don't you think about whether there was anyone else watching Jinghui during the 2 years you were not around? Sun Lan's heart was instantly pierced by thousands of arrows. Qiguan Jinghui was about 2 years older than Chongqing. Calculating the time, she would be 15 years old around the beginning of next spring. She was already a big girl. Wouldn't her peers keep an eye on this fresh flower? Lan and Jinghui are childhood sweethearts. How can their friendship be compared to others? Sun Lan clenched his fists, but his words were not convincing. Feng Yi said, that's true. I wish you good luck. There was no sincerity in these words. Instead, there was a hint of a smile. She was ready to watch a good show. Sun Lan took a deep breath. He wished he could immediately pack his bags and go back to Wanzhou to continue studying at the Golden Scale Academy. In order not to fall behind too much in their studies, the Golden Scale Academy would send him and Feng Yi a copy of the new teaching materials for the past 2 years so that they could continue studying in their free time. If he went back to school now, it would be difficult to maintain his top 3 ranking, but he wouldn't fall below 50, right? Sun Lan was anxious. If he became a slacker, he would be even more unlikable. Right. Before leaving with a pile of documents, Feng Yi looked at her good friend with a faint smile and mercilessly stabbed him. A while ago, Chongqing sent me a letter. She mentioned Jinghui. She said that Jinghui felt that the pale-faced young man was more likable. Sun Lan was bloody from the stab. That night, he went back to rummage through the boxes and cabinets. Sun Wen came back from a walk after dinner and almost had no place to rest. What are you looking for? Half of Sun Lan's body was about to fit into the big box. Without turning her head, she said, "Grandpa, where's the whitening pearl powder you prepared?" Chapter 1734. Lawn, you're exaggerating. On the official road more than 10 miles away from Zhangjiang Pass, hundreds of troops dressed as guards were guarding a few carriages. Feng Yi's smiling voice floated out of the carriage, followed by the clear rebuttal of a young man with a hint of embarrassment and annoyance. The person who retorted was none other than Sun Lan. Just by listening to the young man's voice, one could imagine his angry expression. "Rongli, your face is as white as jade. Of course you don't have to worry. How can you understand our sadness?" Sun Lan pouted angrily while stirring the jade cup with a small jade spoon. From time to time, he would dig a few spoonfuls from a dozen small sandalwood boxes on the table and throw them into the jade cup to stir. After working for most of the day, he carefully applied the sticky product in the jade cup to his face. When Feng Yi came in, she saw Sun Lan with a face mask. Only his eyes and mouth were exposed. The rest of his face was covered by a thick layer of pearl rice powder mask. When Feng Yi saw his attitude, even he, who had a high level of humor, laughed. "You don't understand. This is a very popular whitening method in Wanzhou." Sun Lan took a small mirror and looked at himself. The thick thing on his face was not very comfortable, and he spoke carefully for fear of breaking the mask. Many celebrities are very fond of it. The effect is not bad. "Don't you think my grandfather is getting younger? He said he does it every 3 days. He really looks a lot younger." Sun Lan was as busy as a husky in Zhangjiang Pass. During the day, before dawn, he would wake up to exercise for an hour, eat breakfast, and then go to work. He was busy until sunset before he could get off work. After dinner, he would continue reading the Golden Scale Academy's textbooks until the early hours of the morning. Every day was packed to the brim. How could he have time to learn about the fashion in Wanzhou? So, how did Sun Lan know about these popular beauty treatments in Wanzhou? Speaking of this, Sun Lan felt that his worldview had been reshaped. His grandfather had collected all kinds of ways to use pearl face masks. He had records of what accessories to use for each mask and how many accessories to use. If it weren't for this, Sun Lan wouldn't have known that his grandfather lived such a comfortable life. He only slept for 6 hours a day, but his grandfather was so free that he cooked rabbit meat hot pot and took care of his skin. Hearing this, Feng Yi almost couldn't react. Old man's son uses a bedtime mask to maintain his beauty. In his mind, he pictured the scene of the old man carefully making a facial mask and reading a book. He was so scared that he shivered all over. This method. I've never heard of it. Feng Yi knew that pearl powder could nourish one's skin, but she had never heard that it could be used in such a way. Mixing it into a sticky substance and applying it to one's face, it was strange. Sun Lan said, "It said that it's trending in recent years. In the south, the river channels specialized in producing river pearls. There's a pearl diver here who was deeply moved by the hard work of her parents. She was inspired to learn how to artificially make pearls. He reared the clams in captivity and used artificial methods to make pearls. He made a lot of money from this, and his neighbors followed suit. This caused the price of the river pearls in the vicinity to plummet, and the river pearls could not be sold. At this time, there's another woman. It said that her ancestor was a female official in the Xia dynasty. She's learned many beautifying methods and countless secret recipes. These secret recipes all require pearl powder to be used as medicine. Most of the people living near the dredging river made a living by collecting pearls. Collecting pearls was arduous and dangerous, and tragedies would happen from time to time. With the advent of chaos, the lives of these pearl divers became more difficult. They couldn't even eat, let alone play with pearls. Even so, the people who dredged the river couldn't stop their work of collecting pearls. Instead, they had to collect more river pearls to make a living. This led to an increase in the production of pearls in the past few years, but the price of pearls had been falling. The pearl divers couldn't complain about it. When Feng Yi was still studying in the academy, the headmaster of the academy once mentioned this matter. She never expected that the people there had learned how to artificially make pearls, causing the river pearls to be more abundant. Feng Yi said, "The aristocrats are so fond of pearl powder and use it to nourish one's skin." The price of the pearls, Sun Lan smiled and said, "Of course it has risen, but not by too much. This is a good thing." The pearl divers who dredged the river have all started to raise river pearls, causing the price of the river pearls to plummet. Many pearl divers have lost everything. Now that there's this way, some pearls of poor quality are sold in bulk to cosmetic merchants. They are ground into powder and sell very well. Many people who depend on them have a way to make a living. Feng Yi listened and her slightly furrowed brows relaxed a little. Sun Lan said again, "Grandpa told me. Do you know who the big buyer of the river pearls is?" Feng Yi asked, "Who is it?" Sun Lan said, "General Fu's family." Feng Yi's heart skipped a beat. She said in surprise, "General Fu is still at the front line and he's alone. Why would he be involved in this business?" Although it was only a few words, Feng Yi could guess the huge profits hidden behind this business. The law didn't explicitly state that officials couldn't be involved in business, but fighting for profits with the people was indeed an act that the scholars despised. Sun Lan shook her head and said, "Grandpa's original words, that wolf cub brought back a good wife. His ancestors must have been lucky in their previous lives." Feng Yi understood. "Lady Hui. Yes, an amazing girl. You really can't underestimate her." In Jiang. With Ji's encouragement, Hui Axian didn't trap herself in the backyard. Instead, she thought about how to start a business and find a way out. The spinning wheel with the help of water had long been completed and put into trial operation 2 to 3 years ago. The results were naturally good, but because cotton hadn't been mass-produced, the variety of these spinning wheels was limited. Currently, it was still small. But it was enough to open a cloth shop. She studied a lot of cloth dyeing and printing documents, as well as the content of various spices and rouge. Combining the situation, she opened a comprehensive shop that sold rouge, face powder, and finished cloth. In Jiang. For the sake of Ji and Fu Wang, this shop's business was good. Of course, her ambition wasn't as simple as raising a family. She wanted to make a lot of money. She wanted to expand the shop, and the quality of service and goods were the most important. In the beginning, she had been in charge. After the shop was on the right track, she didn't slack off. She checked every few days and was strict. The palace had the habit of using pearl powder to nourish one's skin. She didn't want to miss this business opportunity, so she needed a stable supply of cheap pearls. By chance, she found out that the river pearls were abundant in Dreamy, and the price was terrifyingly low. The first half of her life was very hard, but the second half of her life was very lucky. She sent people to buy river pearls and bought many secret recipes from a pearl diver. Although the pearl diver claimed that the secret recipe was a secret recipe of the Xia dynasty, she didn't believe it. If there was such a secret recipe, there was no reason that the noble ladies in the aristocratic circle didn't know about it. The Xia dynasty had indeed been destroyed for many years, but the inheritance of the aristocratic families hadn't been broken. What were the aristocratic families? They were the aristocratic families who lived happily and were above the royal family. How could they not know about the secret recipe of the palace? Chapter 1735. He had doubts in his heart. But he didn't say anything. She carefully studied the many secret recipes she had bought and found that these methods were somewhat similar to the existing methods. The supplementary materials added were also good for nourishing the body. After using them, even if they were not good for the body, there was no harm. She might as well try them to see the effect. More importantly, wisdom. He saw a huge business opportunity here. If he could grasp it, he would definitely become rich overnight. River pearls were so cheap, and the people of the world, no matter men or women, had a morbid pursuit of beauty and whitening. There was no need to worry about a lack of business. Didn't you see how 5 minerals powder became popular in the early years? Wasn't it because this thing could strengthen the body and make people whiter? As the saying goes, whiteness covers all ugliness. After whitening, no matter how ugly a person was, his or her looks would immediately increase by several points. Furthermore, because being an official was linked to one's looks, there were even more people who pursued whitening and beautifying their skin. Whitening and beautifying were not only pursued by women, but also by men who were even more particular about it. They could not wait to live in a beauty camera. If this facial mask is really effective, there is no need to worry about not having a market. Opportunities were only given to those who were prepared and had brains. There was no doubt that if they caught him, they would make a huge profit. The people who relied on the river pearls to make a living had also made a lot of money. Among them, the ones who benefited the most were the 2 pearl divers. At this point, he had most likely discovered that these 2 pearl divers were both ginger. The salted fish in Ji Yi's Livestream room. One of them came earlier. The original owner of the body had gone into the water to collect pearls, but he was entangled by the seaweed and almost drowned. After he was rescued, he woke up in the live streaming room and cried, saying that he had been visited by a mountain ghost in his dream and taught pearl divers how to artificially cultivate river pearls. Coincidentally, in reality, this European queen cultivated freshwater pearls. It was said that her father's family had several mines. Even if she failed to cultivate pearls, she could still go home and inherit hundreds of millions of yuan. The other lucky emperor came a little later, more than a year and a half after the first one. She was also a pearl diver, just that a man dressed as a woman. Although he was a pure man, he was a reserve coder who lived a very refined life, a university monk. This European emperor spent 2 hours a day taking care of his skin. His nails were always trimmed neatly. In the words of the European emperor, when he looked at people with his nostrils, they would only see his delicate little nostrils because the messy nose hairs were trimmed neatly. When it came to cosmetics and makeup techniques, he was very familiar with them. His makeup skills made the tomboy blush with shame. According to the lucky emperor, he had an account with millions of fans on Twitter. He was a crossdresser who could bend countless men after putting on makeup. Once he attached himself to this pearl diver's body, he couldn't stand it anymore. Look at that pair of messy eyebrows, look at that coarse and yellowish face, look at that flat and greasy nose, the densely packed blackheads, the thick pores. Her face was covered with acne that she hadn't seen for a long time, and her mouth was filled with thick dental calculi. Even when she spoke, there was a foul smell in her voice. What was even worse was that this girl had celery and garlic for breakfast. Her appetite was really big. The European emperor, who was looking at himself in the water, was so disgusted that he had goosebumps all over his body. He didn't know if he should deal with his dental calculus first, rinse his mouth, or wash his face to get rid of the pimples. Usually at this time, he should be sitting in the dormitory applying a facial mask to rest. However, there was nothing in this shabby place, so he simply replaced it with pearl powder. Those people who want to travel to ancient times must have holes in their brains. The European emperor didn't hide his disgust at all. Coincidentally, he met a person who was sent to secretly investigate the ancient prescription. He presented all kinds of pearl powder facial masks to them and used the title of Great Xia Imperial Secret Prescription to extort a large sum of money from them. He used this money to buy things, left some money for the original owner, and finally returned with a full load. This money was earned by the European emperor, and the things he bought with this money also belonged to the European emperor. It's a pity that there are no papayas. Otherwise, she could have added breast enhancement. This girl's baby will probably be hungry in the future, right? In the eyes of outsiders, the European emperor's trip to transmigration was quite enjoyable, but he himself gave a bad review on the forum. It was fine that he had transmigrated to become a girl, but his cleavage was barren, his skin was rough and yellowish, his face was covered with acne, and he had a mouth full of dental calculi and bad breath. The experience was terrible. As expected, this maverick European emperor became popular. The number of views on a certain makeup tutorial and makeup imitation tutorial soared, and he had more than 10 million fans. Many people even joked that the European emperor should continue to be a delicate young master, and not become a coder who was destined to go bald. Didn't the host's live broadcast room explode from time to time, causing the Weibo platform server to crash every now and then? For more than 10 years, the heaven-sacrificing code monkey could circle the earth 3.5 times. Was it because of the blessing and wisdom of these two European emperors? With his business acumen, various types of pearl face masks became popular in the aristocratic circles. The aristocratic ladies and noble ladies chased after them, and the scholars and celebrities also praised them. People nowadays really had the spirit of seeking death in their bones. In order to whiten their skin, they would even smear lead powder on their faces. Many cosmetics contained excessive amounts of heavy metals. Weren't they afraid of poisoning if they used too much of it? More than 10 years ago, it was fashionable in the aristocratic circles to take 5 stones powder together and sit opposite each other to get rid of lice. Now it was fashionable to wear facial masks at gatherings. Just the thought of a group of celebrities wearing pearl face masks playing with the flowing water was very mesmerizing. As a member of the health team, Old Master Sun Wen had always focused on maintaining his youthful appearance in recent years. Now, he finally sold this Amway to his grandson. Sun Lan looked at Feng Yi's face with jealousy. The two of them were about the same age and were both teenagers. Why was it that Sun Lan was tanned and had a few annoying pimples, while Feng Yi's face was fair, smooth and translucent, and her skin was so white that it was translucent? Looking at this diligent brother in front of him with his head lowered, Sun Lan could not help but give him the Amway. "Do you want to have one too?" Feng Yi smiled faintly. "No, I don't really like these, and I don't need them." Don't need, do. These 3 words kept echoing in Sun Lan's ears, making him want to bend forward in frustration. "A man's face is also very important," Sun Lan said. "That last Chongqing does have some good colors." Feng Yi smiled and asked, "Is my color not good enough?" Sun Lan. What a shameless childhood friend. Even though they were fooling around, the two of them still seized the time to revise their lessons. They had studied in the Golden Scale Academy for several years and knew how profound the lessons in the academy were. In the past 2 years, the number of teaching materials that had been mailed to them had increased exponentially, and they were constantly revised and republished. Even though the two of them had worked very hard, there were too many chores in the military. It was impossible for them to keep up with the group of classmates in the academy who were taught by famous teachers and studied seriously every day. They did not wish to be among the best, but they hoped that their exam results would not be too bad. "You supervise me, and I'll supervise you." The two of them exerted the same vigor as if they were sprinting for the college entrance examination. Other than sleeping, washing, and eating, they spent the rest of their time studying hard. After walking for more than a month, the group finally arrived in Wanzhou. Looking at the towering city that she had not seen for a long time, Feng Yi's heart was filled with emotion. She looked forward to seeing her family in the city, but at the same time, she was worried that the academy's mock exam would disappoint the headmaster. "Lan, why are you shivering? Are you very cold?" Sun Lan took deep breaths, his hands shaking from nervousness. "Rongli, don't you think I've become much fairer?" Chapter 1736. Looking at the trembling Sun Lan, even someone as kind as Feng Yi couldn't help but laugh unkindly. He couldn't help but say, "You're indeed much fairer. Now you're a handsome young man. Do you feel at ease now?" The pearl powder mask did have some effect. Sun Lan's face looked much fairer, and the acne on her face disappeared, leaving only shallow acne marks. Looking at Sun Lan's pitiful look, Feng Yi said the effect was 10%, which made him feel at ease. Sun Lan let out a long sigh of relief. He immediately realized that he was acting a little silly, so he couldn't help but smile shyly. "It's good that you're fairer." His current appearance wouldn't be despised by Jinghui. Feng Yi invited his friend, Lan, "Do you want to rest in my house for a few days?" He knew about Sun Lan's situation. The Sun family only had Sun Lan and old master Sun Wen. The old master was at the front line of Zhangjiang Pass, and only a few servants and housekeepers were left to take care of the mansion in the city. Sun Lan would be alone in the mansion, so it would be better to stay in his house for a few days. Sun Lan declined Feng Yi's invitation. He hadn't been back for a few years, and there were still some chores to take care of, such as the performance of the housekeepers and servants, the management of the mansion, whether there was any embezzlement. If there were any dirty hands and feet, he should get rid of them as soon as possible, so that the mansion wouldn't be in a mess. Even though Sun Lan had no relatives at home, she still had to go back to reorganize. Feng Yi was sensible and didn't force it. "That's good. When you're done, we'll go to the school together." Both families received the news of their return in advance. The housekeeper of Feng Yi's mansion had been waiting outside the city for a few days, but there was no news from Sun Lan. The housekeeper who welcomed Feng Yi was very enthusiastic, and he looked at the young master with gratification. This housekeeper wasn't only an old man by Feng Zhen's side, but also an elder who watched Feng Yi grow up. Looking at the handsome and elegant young master, he was so excited that he almost cried. He couldn't help but say that Feng Yi was taller and more handsome, but also thinner and darker. If he didn't restrain himself, he might have overstepped his boundaries. Seeing the familiar old man, Feng Yi smiled gently and helped him up before the old housekeeper could greet him. "Ever since we received the news, Madam sent me to wait for you outside the city. You're finally here." The old housekeeper's eyes were brimming with tears. He was truly moved by Feng Yi's return. Feng Yi sighed and asked about the situation at home. The old butler said, everything is good in the manor." Feng Yi asked, "I received a letter from home earlier. I heard that mother caught a cold. Is she feeling better?" The mother he spoke of was naturally not his biological mother, but Feng Zhen's current second wife, Wan Xiu. Feng Yi had always respected this stepmother. Before Wan Xiu married Feng Zhen, she had been living in the Feng manor with the tacit cooperation of the father and son. Although the young Feng Yi was carefully taken care of by the housekeeper and servants, he was not as meticulous as the female elders in many aspects. After they became familiar with each other, Wan Xiu often took care of Feng Yi's daily life, which also laid a good foundation for the mother and son. Apart from the age difference, the relationship between mother and son was probably closer than that of an ordinary landowning household. "Madam has been feeling better for a long time. It's just that she has been busy with the affairs of the manor recently and can't make time for it." That's why she sent me to fetch eldest Lang Jun. It was rare for a stepmother and a stepson to get along well. The old housekeeper was also very pleased that the two had a good relationship. After all, everything went well in a harmonious family. Feng Yi said seriously, "Mother is an elder. How could she be sent to wait for the younger generation?" The housekeeper smiled and said, "Eldest Lang Jun is right." After some small talk, Feng Yi noticed the situation with Sun Lan and frowned slightly. The two of them had rushed back in a hurry, but they had already sent a message to the manor in advance. Why didn't anyone come to fetch Sun Lan? However, it was not convenient to ask these questions in public, so they could only keep it to themselves. Because of the initial city planning, Jiang Fei's subordinates lived in the inner circle. Most of Ji Yi's officials lived in the inner circle. In Salted Fish's words, they were the first or second circle. Feng Zhen was the first batch to receive the land deed for the house. Sun Wind joined later, so his house was naturally located further away. Even so, the two of them still traveled together for a while. "Madam, eldest Lang Jun is back." Just as Feng Yi's carriage arrived at the main entrance of the manor, a servant passed the news to Wan Xiu'er. "Rongli is back." Wan Xiu'er had lived a comfortable and contented life in the past few years. Time did not leave any traces on her face. Instead, it added some charm to her face. Looking at her face, Xinzhen's face was like a goose's egg, and her skin was smooth and creamy. Her seductive phoenix eyes were filled with ripples, unlike the dead deep pool they used to be. Her eyes were slender and curved, and her arched eyebrows were like willow leaves in February. Her body was graceful and slim, and her whole body was full of mature charm. Looking at her appearance, no one would believe that she was in her early 30s. People would even believe that she was a young woman in her early 20s. "Greetings, mother." Wan Xiu'er said, "Get up quickly. My son is back. Let me take a good look at him." Looking at the handsome Feng Yi, Wan Xiu'er's heart was filled with a myriad of emotions and a faint sense of regret. If only her first child could be born into the world, perhaps. Thinking of this, Wan Xiu'er was too regretful to continue thinking. She had a child with her scumbag ex-husband, but that scumbag ex-husband was too much of a scumbag. Under the urging of his ex-mother-in-law and concubines, he doubted Wan Xiu'er's innocence and insisted that Wan Xiu'er had been defiled in a bandit village. He even brought up a fallacious theory: a woman's first child was the blood of her first husband. If she wanted to give birth to her husband's child, her first child had to be cleanly aborted to wash away the stain left behind by her first husband. Thus, the scumbag husband personally gave Wan Xiu'er an insidious substance that caused her to have an abortion, causing her to lose her child. Wan Xiu'er's body was already weak, and it was difficult for her to get pregnant. Coupled with that blow, she had no news even after marrying Feng Zhen for so long. Of course, Feng Zhen's frequent business trips was also a big reason. Now that she was over 30, she no longer had any thoughts of getting pregnant. She could only pour all her tenderness into Feng Yi. "Mother, your son is doing very well now." Feng Yi turned around for her to see. "I know you're doing well, but I don't feel at ease until I see it with my own eyes." Wan Xiu'er saw that his clothes were a little thin, and the fabric was a little faded and hairy. She said gently, "I asked the servants to tidy up your room a few days ago. Go and see if there's anything missing. Later, I'll ask the embroidery maids to come and measure for you and make a few new clothes. You can't wear the clothes that were left in the manor in the past." Feng Yi said, "Okay. When school ends at the Golden Scale Academy, Changxing might come to the manor." Wan Xiu'er said with a smile, "Changxing has become more and more beautiful these 2 years. She's also sensible and considerate. She's afraid that I'll be lonely in the manor, so she often comes to visit." Feng Yi's smile deepened. At the same time, Chapter 1737. Sun Lan went all the way back to the mansion. No one came out to greet him when the carriage arrived at the door. The old door was closed and the entrance was deserted. Even the gatekeeper was nowhere to be seen. Although Sun Lan had a good temper, he was a little angry at this scene. Before he could speak, he heard some messy footsteps. It turned out that the housekeeper heard the noise and hurried over. He saw that Sun Lan was much more plump than before. The housekeeper apologized immediately. Sun Lan didn't say anything and he couldn't figure out what he meant. He saw that Sun Lan was a little guilty, but Sun Lan didn't blame him. The housekeeper was relieved for the time being. "I'm tired. I'll go back first." After saying that, he walked past the housekeeper and stepped into the mansion. Looking at Sun Lan, who didn't show his emotions, the housekeeper felt a little uneasy. When Sun Lan saw the main courtyard, which seemed to have been tidied up but was not clean everywhere, the dissatisfaction in her heart deepened. The accompanying guards packed up the things in the carriages. Most of them were books. Not only were there teaching materials sent by the Golden Scale Academy, but there were also a few boxes containing Sun Lan's homework and reading notes. All of them were neatly stacked. A few of them were Sun Lan's belongings and personal clothes. Sun Lan came back a little late on the first day. He reviewed his homework and planned to find his friends tomorrow to understand the situation and familiarize himself with the teaching style of the academy. He and Feng Yi had been off school for more than 2 years. They didn't know what new tricks the Golden Scale Academy had up their sleeves. The winter night turned dark quickly. Sun Lan ordered people to light a few lamps. After dinner, he practiced a set of boxing and continued to read. At about 9:00 in the evening, the guard's attendant called him softly. "What's the matter?" "The housekeeper came just now. He said it's getting late and advised you to go to bed early." Sun Lan asked, "What time is it now?" He didn't feel sleepy. It shouldn't be his usual sleeping time. The attendant answered, "Just at the beginning of the evening." It was still very early. There were still 2 hours before his usual sleeping time. "But, forget it. I have a lot of things to do tomorrow morning. It's better to go to bed early." He was the only one in the mansion. Everything had to go through him. There were a lot of trivial things. However, Sun Lan didn't expect that there would be a surprise, or rather, scare, waiting for him in his room. After a simple bath, Sun Lan put on her pajamas and prepared to sleep. It was dark in the room, and he felt sleepy again. In a daze, he wanted to lie down on the bed. Sun Lan couldn't help but sigh when she felt the warmth of the blanket. It is easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. Staying in the military camp for more than 2 years, he slept on a hard, cold mattress. Every winter, he felt like he had entered an ice house. He had to curl up and wait for his body temperature to warm up the mattress before he felt better. Although the servants in the residence were slacking off, they still remembered to use a hand warmer to warm the bed, so they were not hopeless. With that thought in mind, Sun Lan straightened her feet. Her cold feet suddenly touched 2 soft and warm lumps. Not only was he scared awake by the heat, but the thing was also shivering because of his cold feet. "What is it?" Sun Lan scolded sternly. He sat up in fright, pulled his feet back, and lifted the blanket. The thing reacted quickly. It even wanted to put its hands on his feet and put them in front of her chest. What a shameless ghost! Sun Lan quickly took out her sword and unsheathed it, ready to kill the demon. The guards outside heard the noise and rushed in. Before they saw anything, they heard a woman crying and begging. The 2 guards on night duty looked at each other and tacitly took a step back. They asked what happened. Sun Lan was still in a state of shock. She vaguely saw a naked woman lying at the end of the bed and realized that her feet had just touched something. She was both embarrassed and annoyed. She clenched her sword tightly and gnashed her teeth. "It's okay. Get out of here." The guards exchanged ambiguous looks. Nothing needed to be said. Sun Lan's sword never left his body. With a cold face, he lit all the lights in the room. He found the naked woman kneeling at the end of the bed. Her long black hair was draped over her back, and some of it fell to her shoulders. It made her exposed skin look fairer and more delicate. Sun Lan looked away in embarrassment. "Who are you?" The woman, or rather, the girl, looked to be about 15 or 16 years old. She had a well-developed body. "I'm here to warm your feet." Warm his feet. Strip naked and climb into his bed to warm his feet. Sun Lan had learned something new. Even a hand warmer was better than this thing. Why did he have to find someone to occupy his bed? If not, he could put on some clothes and leave. What was the point of stripping naked? Sun Lan stood far away and spoke her mind very frankly. The young girl who heard it was both embarrassed and embarrassed. She was simply too ashamed to show her face. I'm also here to serve eldest Lang Jun, to warm his feet." They were girls who could sleep with him. There was no need to give them any status. They were even worse than cheap concubines. They used their bodies to warm the bed and their master's feet. If the master had any needs, he could also use them to vent. Jiang had caused a ruckus that year. All the families were smart and did not dare to have concubines. Because they did not have enough merits, they were not qualified to have concubines. Once a concubine was taken, it would be a crime of overstepping the rules. If it was a light punishment, he would lose his position. If it was a heavy punishment, his whole family would be in trouble. But a man could not have only one wife in his life. No matter how delicious the food was, after a few years, they would get tired of it. They needed a change of taste. Even if it was a pile of stale shit, as long as it was something that these men had not eaten before, they would want to try it. Therefore, there was another meaning to the term feet-warming maid. Not only was she responsible for warming the master's feet, but she also had to warm the master's body and heart and accompany him to sleep. Sun Lan was used to the dirty talk of the soldiers during his stay in the military camp. After being influenced, he was not so pure anymore. He could understand the girl's subtext. "Oh, did the housekeeper send you here?" He snorted coldly, and the maid shivered in fear upon hearing him. It was not hot in the room and she was naked. It would be strange if she did not shiver. Since when can a servant intervene in the master's private affairs and take charge of the master's room? Sun Lan would never have thought that on his first night back, there would be such a bold girl who wanted to climb into his bed. What did she think he was? He was angry just thinking about it. The foot-warmer girl was about to cry. Under the candlelight, she looked pitiful and cute. Especially her naked body, it was even more stimulating to the energetic young man. If an ordinary rich man saw this, he would most likely accept the girl. Why not eat the meat that was delivered to his door? Sun Lan felt ashamed and angry as if he had been humiliated and fooled. He pointed his sword at the girl and said, "Get out. Get out. Get the housekeeper in here. I want to ask him if he, a servant, wants to turn the world upside down." The housekeeper was lax and did not do his job well. He actually wanted to use women to please him. Just the thought of it disgusted him. She was just a servant. How could she try to play with the master and use such a disgusting method? The mistress of an ordinary aristocratic family would indeed arrange a maid to teach the children who were about to reach adulthood. Whether to reject or accept, they would have to ask the person's opinion. Chapter 1738. What are you waiting for? Get out. Sun Lan wanted to put his sword on the neck of the foot-warming girl. In his eyes, the body that could make a man's heart sway was more humiliating than flirtatious. Even though he was a young man who had never seen a woman naked before, when he saw the feet-warming girl in this state, he felt disgusted and nauseous. Under the orange candlelight, his body looked like a white-skinned domestic pig that had been scalded by hot water. When he thought of how he saw the logistician slaughtering pigs in the military camp, he looked at the foot-warming girl with even more disgust. The feet-warming girl was frightened by Sun Lan's unprovoked anger, and she even forgot to shed tears that were rolling down her cheeks. She was the housekeeper's most beloved daughter. Before Sun Lan came back, she had heard more than once about this eldest son from her father. Everyone in the mansion knew that Sun Lan loved the noblewoman Qiguan Jinghui. This noblewoman had a high chance of becoming the future legal wife of the mansion. Qiguan Jinghui's daughter had a good temperament and Sun Lan was a generous and kind husband. If she became his concubine, even if she was a foot-warming girl without a title, once she was taken in, she would have a good life in the future. Even if Sun Lan didn't love her, the person in charge of the mansion was her father. Her life wouldn't be too bad. The father and daughter helped each other, and in the future, they would have a son and a daughter. Neither she nor the housekeeper thought about Qiguan Jinghui's and Sun Lan's opinions. Would Qiguan Jinghui allow her husband to have a foot-warming girl before marriage? She would. After all, she had a good temperament. Sun Lan had followed the army for more than 2 years, and this kind noblewoman occasionally took care of the Sun mansion. Besides, the noblewoman had a high status. Why would she care about a lowly concubine? Which nobleman from an aristocratic family didn't have a woman before marriage? He just didn't have a concubine's child. All the particular families valued the eldest legitimate son the most. They would never have a concubine's eldest son or daughter to embarrass the legal wife. The foot-warming girl didn't want to have the upper hand in childbirth. She only asked Sun Lan to let her have a son and a daughter after the legal wife married and gave birth to the first son. Would Sun Lan refuse angrily? Of course not. There was no reason not to eat a fat piece of meat that was delivered to his doorstep. Moreover, he was young and full of vigor. A virgin chicken could not withstand a woman's teasing. If it wasn't a virgin but an experienced driver, then there would be even less to worry about. He had never expected that Sun Lan would choose to reject him. For a moment, the foot-warming girl was a little confused. Sun Lan's rage skyrocketed until it reached the breaking point. He sneered, "You're not going to leave, are you?" The feet-warming maid opened her mouth to argue, but Sun Lan said to the door, "Come in. Come in." Who? While the feet-warming girl was in a daze, the guard who was on guard outside came in with a confused look on his face. No, if the master wanted to pamper a little girl, why did he call the 2 brothers in? Watching the show from the sidelines. Sun Langjun looked rather shy and kind, but he shouldn't have such a weird hobby, right? Or, the little Langjun was a virgin and didn't know how to perform the ceremony of husband and wife. The guard imagined a drama. The feet-warming girl screamed in a low voice and grabbed the quilt to cover her naked body. She suddenly understood why Sun Lan called the 2 guards in. She was so scared that tears streamed down her face. She grabbed the quilt to cover her body with one hand and crawled to Sun Lan's feet with the other. She grabbed his trousers and cried, "Langjun, please have mercy on me. I won't dare to do it again. Please have mercy on me. It's just my first offense. Please don't give me to these 2 people. I know I'm wrong. Please have mercy on me, Langjun." The 2 guards were shocked after hearing that. Did he call them in not to watch the show and give them applause, but to give them benefits? Sun Lan was shocked by the feet-warming girl's actions. No matter how good-tempered he was, he couldn't help but lift his foot and kick the other's shoulder. The kick made her roll on the ground twice, and the other's body rolled into the quilt. When he couldn't see the white flesh, the nausea in Sun Lan's throat was slightly suppressed. He pointed at the feet-warming girl and said, "Throw her out and let that old thing come and get her." How did these people usually make up stories and slander him? If he continued to stay in the mansion, would it be him and his grandfather who were in charge of the Sun Mansion, or these servants who were in charge? Sun Lan's words burst the bubble in the guard's heart. The two did as they were told. They carried the feet-warming girl, who was rolled into a spring roll, out of the yard. "It's freezing outside. It's not good to do this, is it?" Garda still had tender feelings for the fairer sex. Seeing the feet-warming girl shivering and crying like a pear blossom in the rain, his heart softened a little. His Lang Jun was also a ruthless person. He didn't even eat such a beautiful girl who was sent to his mouth, and he even rolled her up and threw her out. He was undoubtedly a straight man. Guard B sneered, "Do your job. The master already dislikes her, and you still pity her. Do you think it's your turn? Is this considered very good? At least she has a quilt. If you throw her into the pond with the quilt, it'll be so embarrassing in this cold weather. That's cruel." The feet-warming girl was really thrown out by Sun Lan. At the same time, he also regretted it. The quilt should be left, the anger subsided, and Sun Lan shivered because of the cold. Even if there was heating in the room, his pajamas were still very thin. Sun Lan grabbed the clothes and put them on. After warming up a little, he began to have a headache about his recklessness just now. Looking at the situation in the mansion, he was afraid that it was as lax as a sieve. There were no servants, and their mouths were probably leaking. After such a mess, when the sun rose tomorrow, he didn't know how this gossip would spread. He scratched his loose bun, and his long hair poured over his shoulders. Sun Lan could only accept his fate and clean up the mess for his recklessness. After so many years in the military camp, Sun Lan was really not the soft and cute little girl he used to be. His methods were also swift and decisive. It should be known that there was no shortage of hooligans and ruffians in the military camp. Their quality was worrying. Even if the political commissar brainwashed them and instilled all kinds of ideas, the speed of cultural edification and literacy could not keep up with the speed of the expansion of the army. As a result, the overall cultural level of the military camp had been half dead. Sun Lan dealt with them all day long. How could he still be a cute little girl who was easy to talk to? Whether it was coercion or threats, in short, he had to let the servants in the mansion know fear and learn to be careful with their words. The best and fastest way was no different from killing a chicken to warn the monkey. Which chicken to kill? Sun Lan sneered. That housekeeper was a good target. When the housekeeper was arrested, he was still chatting with his wife in the quilt and thinking about the future. When Sun Lan's guards rushed in and took him out of the quilt, they followed the clues and arrested the housekeeper's confidants as well. They tied them up and threw them in front of Sun Lan. The housekeeper was still confused. He had worked hard for the Sun family for so long. Even if he didn't get any credit, he still worked hard. Why did Sun Lan treat people who had done meritorious service like this? The atmosphere in the hall was oppressive. Several servants and maids knelt and trembled. Chapter 1739. The butler was forced to kneel for a long time. At first, he begged for mercy on his behalf, but Sun Lan ignored him. He could not continue his one-man show, and his voice slowly died down under Sun Lan's aura. For a moment, only the sound of bamboo slips colliding could be heard. Sun Lan was checking the accounts. The grandfather and grandson had not been in the mansion for the past 2 or 3 years, and the mansion's various expenditure records were done by the butler. Most of the grandfather's salary for the past 2 years went to the treasury, and a small part was used for the mansion's daily expenses and the servants' monthly allowance. However, when Sun Lan sent someone to check, she found that a lot of things were missing from the treasury, and even the salary for the past 2 or 3 years was missing by 20 to 30%. Because the mansion only had the grandfather and grandson, and there were not many servants serving them, Sun Lan could roughly estimate the expenditure at a glance after working in the military logistics for so many years. How could she not know? Haha, someone was greedy, and not only was he greedy, but he was also greedy for his grandfather's salary. Making false accounts was blamed on him. Did they really think that they could embezzle as they pleased just because they never opened the treasury to check? If they did not punish these crafty servants, once the news got out, they would become the laughingstock of outsiders. What was the use of strategizing on the battlefield? If they could even deceive a few crafty servants when they returned to the mansion, what would happen to their reputation? Thinking of this, Sun Lan's eyes were filled with killing intent. All these years, you served us hard, but grandfather and I did not mistreat you, right? Not only did they not mistreat him, but they treated him well. Because of the disaster, grandfather was cold to outsiders, but he treated these people who served him very well. Unfortunately, these people took advantage of him, and could not see themselves clearly. Instead, they treated everything in the master's family as their own. The butler's heart skipped a beat, and he knew that he had messed up. He trembled and said, this old servant was also blinded by lard. The master had already put on such an attitude, and if he continued to be stubborn, he would not be able to get any benefits. It was better to play the emotional card and beg for leniency. In fact, it was not uncommon for a butler to be greedy, but there were not many who were as greedy as him. He was originally just a little greedy. That little bit of money was not a big deal, and he could just make a false account to fool others. The master was not stingy, and Sun Wen did not have time to carefully check the accounts for a few strings of silver. As long as the accounts were not outrageous, they would not care about this matter. After that, Sun Wen and Sun Lan both left the mansion for 2 to 3 years. Furthermore, the housekeeper had a lot of power in his hands. He could easily get close to the property in the mansion. It was too convenient for him to be greedy. Today, he needed to brag to others, so he took some. Tomorrow, his wife wanted to buy some makeup and new clothes, so he took some. The day after that, he was going to a brothel to meet his lover, so he took some. The day after that, a poor relative came to ask for some money, so he took some. In short, it was to buy, and buy to their heart's content, chopping off their hands again and again. The wealth of the Sun residents became his pocket. It was not difficult for him to take and use it however he wanted. After a long time, he became complacent. Not only did he become arrogant, but he also became even more extravagant in spending money. He bought mansions, bought maids to serve him, and lived like a real rich master. When he sobered up a little and saw the gap in the accounts getting bigger and bigger, he knew something was wrong. The master did not care about the 2 strings of coins, but what if the residents lost a few thousand strings of coins? One had to know that Qiguan Rang, Feng Jin, and a few other important officials had annual salaries ranging from 7 to 9,000 strings of coins according to their positions. Zhang Ping and a few other big shots in scientific research had the highest annual salaries. Their salary plus Jiang Yu's allowance was about 10,000 strings of coins. Naturally, Old Man Sun's salary would not exceed this amount. The amount of money that the housekeeper had embezzled over the past few years had directly swallowed Old Man Sun's annual salary. How could his appetite not be big? At this time, the salary was not fully paid. Part of it was replaced with gold and silver, and the other part was rice, meat, cloth, and even antiques. The housekeeper took away the unmarked money because it was convenient to circulate, but it was also easy to be exposed. The gap was too big, and the housekeeper could not balance the accounts. At this time, the news of Sun Lan's return reached his ears, and he was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. It would be fine if Sun Lan did not check the accounts, but once she did, his whole family would die. Therefore, the housekeeper thought of a way to save the country in a roundabout way. If Sun Lan took in his youngest daughter, then he would be half a father-in-law to Sun Lan. If his daughter did not disappoint and was favored by Sun Lan alone, or even if his daughter was pregnant with the eldest son of a concubine. For the sake of the bloodline, even if he embezzled 1,000 strings of coins, this pair of grandfather and grandson would probably be lenient, right? The housekeeper's plan was brilliant, but Sun Lan was not the lecherous person he thought she was. Sun Lan took a glance and knew that the amount of money that the housekeeper and the others had embezzled was enough to kill them. She threw the bamboo slip away. Flog them to death. The housekeeper's expression changed dramatically, and the other accomplices were also frightened. Some cried, and some begged for mercy. Sun Lan could not help but sneer, and asked, "Do you know who you are?" The housekeeper and the others could not help but shrink back. "If you don't remember, then let me tell you who you are. You are slaves bought by the Sun residents, and belong to the lowly register. You are also the private property of the Sun residents." Sun Lan did not leave the slightest face to reveal their background, and the housekeeper felt even more humiliated from head to toe. During the days when Sun Wen and Sun Lan were not around, the housekeeper gradually lived a wealthy life. He lived in a mansion bigger than the Sun residence, and the maids and servants in the mansion were several times that of the Sun residence. Gradually, the housekeeper forgot that his birthplace was not a good one. Sun Lan continued, "According to the current law, those who embezzled 1 string of coins will be tattooed on their faces and displayed in public. Those who embezzled 5 strings of coins will be exiled for 1,000 miles. Those who embezzled 10 strings of coins will be beheaded in public. Those who embezzled 20 strings of coins will be skinned and cut into grass. As for the punishment for embezzling 30 strings of coins, 50 strings of coins, and 100 strings of coins, you know in your heart. Think about it, as the servants of the Sun residents, how much money and grain have each of you embezzled from the master's family? Your whole family's life is not enough to pay for it. Your children, wives, parents, none of them can escape. In serious cases, you will be exterminated. Who gave you the courage to do such a thing? Are you bullying us because we are weak and can't control you, or do you think we are stupid and easy to bully?" When Sun Lan said these words full of killing intent, the housekeeper sat on the ground as if he was drained of his strength. The others were so scared that they forgot to cry and beg. They had received a lot of benefits from the housekeeper, and the money they embezzled was about 50 strings of coins to 100 strings of coins. Who knew that it would be so serious? The housekeeper suddenly came back to his senses, and cried and begged, "I have really been blinded by lard. Please, Elder Lang Jun, for the sake of our past relationship, let me off this time. I will do my best to serve Elder Lang Jun in the future, and I will never dare to do such a thing again." Everyone wanted to live, and it was scary to think of the way to be beaten to death. Sun Lan looked at their reaction coldly, and suddenly thought of something. "Wait, keep it first." The housekeeper could not help but be overjoyed, but before he could rejoice, Sun Lan's words sent him back to hell. "You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.